Chapter 974. Boss, we're here. Looking at the floating signal balls in the distance, Bell Lester put down his hand and said with a smile. Although Jiang Hai's fish farm did not have a net fence at the periphery, Edward Anderson deliberately placed some floating signal balls at the periphery to tell the fishermen that this was the border. If they dared to come over, they would be trespassing on the private fish farm. Admittedly, Edward Anderson's move was not bad. Plus, there were satellite surveillance and radio signals all day long. Some people who did not want to steal fish, or those who wanted to steal fish, but were timid, would stay away from this place. Of course, there were also some shameless people who scolded Jiang Hai for being shameless. In their eyes, the ocean belonged to everyone and it was also their home. Jiang Hai surrounded the fish farm and caught the fish himself. That was the most shameless move. What? Jiang Hai spent money to buy it? He didn't pay for it, so why did they say he bought it? There were indeed many people in the United States who had such thoughts. After all, this kind of logic and thinking was popular in this country. However, those who had such thoughts were basically honest now. Since the end of last year's naval battle, very few people dared to steal fish near Jiang Hai's waters. Even if they did, they would use small speedboats to catch fish, or use hand nets to steal in the dark. The losses were very small. The most important thing was that these people did not encounter Big Fool and the others. If they were patrolling, they would definitely lose their fishing nets and rods. If they were too greedy, they might not even be able to keep their boats and people. Perhaps because Jiang Hai's fish farm was so evil, in the past 6 months or so, very few people came to fish here, giving the fish a period of time to recuperate. According to Edward Anderson, according to the ship's sonar, there were a lot of fish nearby. Although there were not as many fish as Jiang Hai's fish farm, the number was still considerable. After driving along Jiang Hai's floating line for about 5 hours, Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the head of Jiang Hai's fish farm. About 50 nautical miles to the south was the territory of New York. It was obvious that Jiang Hai's fish farm was really large. After arriving at the place, Jiang Hai and the others began to prepare. After a simple lunch, Jiang Hai and the others took out the large pieces of cow internal organs that they had prepared. The cow internal organs were freshly killed before departure, and they were frozen in the ship. Americans almost didn't eat internal organs, but they also knew that these things were quite good for fishing. Originally, internal organs had a miraculous effect when fishing. In addition, these were the internal organs of Jiang Hai's beef cattle, which contained spiritual energy, so the effect was naturally stronger. Because they were going to catch great white sharks, Jiang Hai and the others also made the internal organs of these cows big, tied them to the ship with the thickest fishing line, and then threw these internal organs into the water. Although the weather was still a little cold, the moment the internal organs were thrown into the water, countless seemingly lazy fish swarmed up and began to peck at them. Jiang Hai looked down from the bow of the ship. Wow, he had to admit that the fishing resources nearby were really good. There were all kinds of fish. Barracuda, sea bass, bream, cod, herring, mackerel, shorefish, scorpion, and even some wild salmon were all pecking at the internal organs. Looking at these fish, Edward Anderson was also a little envious. He lifted the internal organs up and then threw the net down, catching 2 Atlantic salmon that were about 10 kilograms in weight. After throwing them on the ship, he cleaned up. There was finally a dish to go with wine in the evening. After digging out the internal organs, he threw the fish into the frozen storage, and then watched the fish eat the internal organs happily. Soon, this piece of internal organs was eaten up. They also knew that they couldn't rush fishing, so Edward Anderson put another piece in. This time, it should be a reward, because when the internal organs were just put in, these fish were still eating crazily, but suddenly most of the fish were stunned for a moment, and then many of them swam away quickly. In the distance, on the sea level, a dorsal fin stood up. "It's coming, be careful." Looking at the dorsal fin, Edward Anderson also said loudly, and then retreated to the ship with everyone. Jiang Hai's yacht was a large yacht with 8 rooms. It was far from something that sharks or killer whales could carry, so they were not worried about this. But if they exposed their heads, sharks would also jump. If they bit Jiang Hai, it would be troublesome. Pfft. Just as Jiang Hai and the others retreated, the shark also accelerated and rushed over quickly. It went up and bit directly on the internal organs, but before it could swallow, the huge hook had already hooked its mouth. In pain, this guy also jumped out of the water and wanted to break free, but it was stuck by the barb. Good luck, the first shot hit. Looking at the shark that jumped up, Edward Anderson grinned. There were quite a lot of large shark species. In addition to the great white shark, there were many sharks such as tiger sharks, gray mako sharks, hammerhead sharks, bull sharks, and so on. So although Jiang Hai and the others were fishing for sharks, they were not sure whether they were fishing for the great white shark they wanted. Of course, some other sharks were also possible except for the tiger shark. Because this shark was too stupid as long as it had a little IQ, Jiang Hai also had the possibility of domesticating it, but the brain of this shark was estimated to be similar to that of a worm. It was too stupid and Jiang Hai had no way to domesticate it. In fact, most sharks were very stupid, their brains were only the size of soybeans, and they lived more or less according to their instincts. Why did Jiang Hai want to catch a great white shark? It was because this shark was relatively smart, unlike tiger sharks that would swallow anything. When a great white shark attacks humans, it doesn't like to eat humans. Most of the time it would treat humans like seals. Therefore it would take a bite, and when it feels that something is wrong it would let go. This can be considered as a sign of intelligence. Jiang Hai's luck was good. The first shark he caught was a typical great white shark, with a white belly, gray body and small eyes. Edward Anderson had dealt with this creature many times. In the beginning, fishermen hated this shark because this creature would attack the fishermen, and at the very least, it would eat the fish caught by the fishermen, causing a certain amount of losses. At the same time, it was also impossible to eat it. Sharks did not have a bladder, and once it died, its urine would enter the meat. No matter how fast you killed it, the shark's meat would have a foul smell. Therefore, no one in the West ate this kind of fish. It was not until huaxia restaurants opened all over the world that the fishermen changed their view of this kind of creature. Huaxia restaurants had ways to get rid of the fishy smell, and shark fin was a great tonic. Naturally, sharks went from an existence that was hated by others to an existence that everyone liked. Therefore, the number of these guys decreased rapidly. Although the United States did not prohibit others from hunting sharks, all huaxia restaurants or restaurants that served shark's fin were not allowed to serve shark's fin alone, only whole sharks. This greatly reduced the misfortune of sharks being slaughtered. This was because no one would catch a whole shark, freeze it and then sell it. This was really a bit difficult. In addition, environmental protection organizations were always looking for trouble. Now, except for some Japanese and African ships, there were very few people who would hunt sharks. At least, Jiang Hai, as the owner of the manor, had not eaten shark's fin seriously many times. Control it, let it jump, and consume its strength. Although Jiang Hai was a little dazed when he saw the shark in front of him, Edward Anderson was very clear-headed. He immediately pulled the thickest fishing line, and then said to Knerson Peters and Harriman Fells behind him. The two people's reactions were not slow. They immediately came over and pulled the line, one tight and one loose. When the shark was downstream, they had to release the line as much as possible. When the shark was a little annoyed and jumped out of the water, they had to pull the line back and let the shark fall back into the water again. The shark's brain was not very good, which was why they dared to do this. The first shark that Jiang Hai caught was not very big, about 3 meters long. It was still in the state of immaturity, so it was not very good in strength or endurance. In less than 20 minutes it was finished. Edward Anderson, Knerson Peters, and Harriman Fells pulled it to the side of the boat. Then Jiang Hai came over and everyone turned it over. When the shark turned over, it would enter a state of static. Although they did not know why it was true. Some people said that this was because when a shark flipped over, the world it saw would be reversed. It would be very scared, and its brain would secrete a chemical component to make it fall into a coma. Some people said that this was called forced stillness. But in any case, it was indeed true. Jiang Hai looked at the shark that could not move at all except for opening its mouth to drink water. He smiled and then put his hand on its belly. As the spiritual energy in Jiang Hai's body surged, a piece of spiritual energy disappeared into Jiang Hai's body and entered the shark. In an instant, Jiang Hai felt that there was some connection between him and the shark. From today on you will be called Big White. Not good. There is a Xiao Bai at home, so you will be called First White. Patting the belly of the great white shark, Jiang Hai said with a smile. His navy has expanded again. Chapter 975. Oh, you're back, how was your day? Seeing Jiang Hai walk into the hotel with Belle Lester and Harriman Ferns, old Toby couldn't help laughing and talking, and Jiang Hai also got along well with this old man after yesterday's interaction. Not bad, huh? Thinking of his harvest today, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. It's good that the harvest is good, but I have to advise you, it's better to take it easy. If you attract the Coastal Patrol or the people from the Fishery Administration, it will be troublesome. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Toby couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Hai. What does this have to do with the Fishery Administration and the Coastal Patrol? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with some doubts. Aren't you catching sharks and bluefin tuna? Hearing Jiang Hai's doubtful words and his sincere eyes, Toby couldn't help but be stunned, then he looked at him with some doubts. Who said that? Isn't this bullshit? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai, Bell and Harriman behind him looked at each other. Aren't you asking about where to see great white sharks? Also, this is the place where bluefin tuna is produced. Don't tell me you're just here for fun. Hearing Jiang Hai's puzzled words, Toby smiled. He felt that he was almost fooled by Jiang Hai. This guy was asking about great white sharks in the bar yesterday. Almost many people in the town know about it. This is not a secret. Asking about great white sharks, he's not just here for fun, he must have some ulterior motives. They are right, Jiang Hai does have ulterior motives, but unfortunately they don't know what Jiang Hai is planning. Aren't you accusing us wrongly? I really have nothing to do. I live nearby but I've never seen a great white shark before. That's why I brought some people out. I wanted to see the great white sharks and see how big the biggest one is. That's all. Today I caught 3 great white sharks but I let them go after taking a look. This can be proven by the video camera on my ship. Shaking his head helplessly, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to Toby with a speechless face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Toby was also a little confused. His sixth sense told him that Jiang Hai might be true. After all, he knows Jiang Hai's ship. If he just came to steal shark fin and tuna, he shouldn't be able to afford such a ship. Okay, what do you want to eat tonight? In fact, this matter has nothing to do with him, so he just smiled indifferently and asked Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also looked at Bell and Harris. I want to eat meat. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, Bell Lester was the first to speak. I want to eat cod. Hearing Bell speak, Harriman Fells smiled and said with a muffled voice. According to the former secretary, Harriman Fells didn't have a good life when he was young. He often freeloaded food from other families in the town. Compared to beef, frozen cod was cheap and delicious, so he preferred fish to beef. I want to eat shrimp. Tell Uncle George to do as he sees fit. After thinking for a moment, Jiang Hai said to old Toby. Hearing that Jiang Hai and the others finished ordering, old Toby walked to the kitchen and told old George about Jiang Hai's request. Then the kitchen began to get busy again. Not long after, dishes were served and Jiang Hai and the others had a good meal. After dinner, the 3 went back to sleep. Tonight, they didn't need to deliver food to Edward Anderson and the others. This was because they ate on the ship. Compared to Bell and Harriman Fells, Edward Anderson was a good cook. After all, he lived alone for so long and he often went to sea in the past. Therefore, it was inevitable that he had good skills. When Jiang Hai and the others got off the ship, he was almost done. The salmon was made into sashimi and fried. With Edward Anderson around, Jiang Hai didn't have to worry about them going hungry. The next morning, after Jiang Hai and the others had breakfast, they went to sea again. This time, they sailed to the southernmost part of Jiang Hai's fishing farm. Great white sharks weren't stupid. Although the overflowing spiritual energy in the fish farm made them drool, they preferred to live in warmer waters. Although Massachusetts and New York were close to each other, New York was warmer than Massachusetts. Therefore, great white sharks usually lived in this area. At least, Edward Anderson was very clear about this. The ship arrived here at noon. Jiang Hai and the others had a simple meal of fish noodle soup, and then they started to work. Fishermen on the sea liked eating noodle soup very much. Firstly, it was convenient, and secondly, it tasted good. Although it was stewed messily, it warmed the body up after eating it. In addition, it also replenished the body with enough water. The seafood was freshly caught. As long as there were enough ingredients, the taste wouldn't be bad. Most importantly, there were many vegetables in it. The scariest disease on an ocean voyage was scurvy, which was caused by eating less fruits and vegetables. If you want to eat vegetables alone, you have to stir-fry them. Most importantly, there are very few people who like to eat them. Americans are carnivores. Under such circumstances, putting them in a pot of stew is a good choice. Jiang Hai has suffered before, so he can be said to be a super loser. He likes to eat the best beef. He also likes to eat this thing. He also likes to eat it. After watching the ship sail to the place, Edward Anderson said to Jiang Hai, "Boss, let's get started. Drive a little bit further, we'll do it after we reach our territory." Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said to Edward Anderson. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts. He didn't understand why Jiang Hai wanted to sail to his territory, but it didn't matter. It wasn't too far away, so he quickly turned the steering wheel and entered Jiang Hai's territory. As soon as he entered, the radio over there rang. "Attention, attention, you are now entering private waters. Please report your identity, otherwise we will expel you." Hearing the voice on the radio, Edward Anderson couldn't help but smile and pull up the radio. "Tommy, you bastard, look carefully, this is the boss ship, it's us." Pressing the button, Edward Anderson shouted loudly, and hearing Edward Anderson's words, Tommy Charles on the other side also dragged his voice awkwardly. "Well, I said I didn't wake up just now. I don't know if the boss will believe me." Hearing Tommy Charles's words, the people on the ship laughed. After chatting for a while, they began to fish for sharks. Because of yesterday's success, they didn't have anything to worry about this year. They put down the fresh beef innards and waited for the shark to come up. Soon, a nearly 5-meter-long great white shark took the bait. Compared to the 4-meter-long ones they caught yesterday, this guy was much more difficult to deal with. This guy kept circling around Jiang Hai's boat, trying to pull off the hook, jumping up and down, flipping back and forth. This fish tossed and turned for nearly an hour before it stopped. Then it was pulled to the side of the boat. After Jiang Hai touched it, he threw it back into the sea. The great white shark that entered the water rested for about 5 minutes under the water, then plunged into Jiang Hai's fishing ground. But if it was before yesterday, it would have eaten a lot of food when it entered the fishing ground. But this time it lived peacefully with most of the fish. Unless the fish happened to block its path, it would eat it, otherwise it wouldn't take the initiative to hunt. In the distance, the silly couple and the dolphins were also moving forward. But in the same way, after these Marines saw this guy, they didn't pay attention to him and let him enter the hinterland. After entering the hinterland, this big guy converged with the great white shark 3 days ago. After these 4 sharks converged, they began to patrol in the opposite direction of Jiang Hai's ship. If they encounter a fish, they will eat it. If they don't, they will continue to swim. If there are some large fish outside the range of the fishing ground, they will rush over and bite it. Then they will drive most of the fish into Jiang Hai's fishing ground, and a small part of the fish will naturally enter their stomach. When this shark began to patrol, Jiang Hai waited for more than half an hour before the next shark was hooked, but unfortunately this shark was a tiger shark. Jiang Hai thought for a moment. After pulling the shark over, he was ready to release it, but before releasing it he must take out the hook, otherwise the shark will be infected. However, just as Jiang Hai and the others tired the shark and turned it over, 3 boats quickly rushed over. "This is the coastal patrol, the boats in front, please stop all movements and accept the investigation." Before they arrived, the loudspeaker and radio sounded together. Looking at the 3 boats rushing over, Edward Anderson glanced at Jiang Hai, then quietly gave Jiang Hai a thumbs up. He was also thinking, how did Jiang Hai know that these guys will come over? Looking at these guys, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seems that his guess was indeed correct. Just as Jiang Hai and the others put down the work in their hands, the 3 boats also approached. Jiang Hai knew 2 of the boats. One was the coastal patrol. Jiang Hai often dealt with them and their relationship was good. One of the boats belonged to the Fishery Administration, which was responsible for managing individual fishermen. The other boat was filled with ordinary people. They wore ordinary clothes, but there was a black mark on the right side of their necks. Chapter 976. After these people got off the boat, they directly boarded Jiang Hai's yacht. While walking here, they kept taking photos, including Jiang Hai's group who were stroking sharks. Seeing them taking photos there, Jiang Hai was a little unhappy and frowned. As soon as he frowned, Cornelison Peters, who was behind him, stood up at once. Seeing Cornelison Peters coming over, the person who was taking photos was still pressing the shutter. Cornelison Peters directly snatched the camera away. You, what are you doing? We have the permission to shoot and the right to know. Only you are allowed to do it, but we are not allowed to expose it? Looking at his camera being taken away, the people here shouted loudly, but Cornelison Peters ignored him. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to rush over. Instead, he directly handed the camera to Jiang Hai. You have the permission to shoot? I don't remember giving you such a privilege. After taking the SLR camera, Jiang Hai directly took out the memory card from it, then in front of them he crushed it into several pieces and threw it into the sea. You. Don't you care? Looking at Jiang Hai throwing his work into the sea, this person's face turned green. One must know that in the memory card there were not only the photos taken just now, there were a lot of other things. These people were from the World Animal Protection Association. Looking at the black label on their mouth, they knew that there were English animals written on it. However, the World Animal Protection Association was not a very official organization. Although the head was official, most of the people who joined were people who originally had their own jobs, either to pick up girls or really like animals or for other reasons they joined here. For example, this guy used to be a cameraman. His main job was to take pictures of young models and so on. There were many of his masterpieces in the memory card. Now he was finished. But looking at the size of Jiang Hai and Cornelison Peters, he didn't dare to come over to pick a fight. He could only look at the coastal patrol and shout at them. But the coastal patrol looked at Jiang Hai at this time, a little embarrassed. "Mr. Jiang, is this your boat?" Hearing Jiang Hai's gaze, the people on his side couldn't just stand there. After hesitating for a moment, the captain of the team came over and said to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face, "It's mine, I remember I registered it." Hearing the captain's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Jiang Hai was deeply influenced by his country. Although it was said that in the United States, the rich were the father, Jiang Hai was still very used to having a good relationship with officials, especially these violent institutions. Therefore, he couldn't say that he bribed the Winthrop Police Department, the Boston Police Department, and the Massachusetts Police Department, including the Coastal Patrol. He could only say that he donated a lot of money to them. Among them, Jiang Hai donated a total of $12 million to the Winthrop Police Department in 3 years. It could be said that the Winthrop Police Department had everything from people to horses to weapons, and ammunition had Jiang Hai's money on it, as well as Jiang Hai's taxes. Therefore, the Winthrop Police Department was similar to Jiang Hai's servants. In Boston, Jiang Hai donated $3 million, and Massachusetts donated $8 million. This was a small amount of money for Jiang Hai, but it also made the police look at Jiang Hai with 1.2 million points of respect. In Massachusetts, in a simple police agency, Jiang Hai's fart might be more effective than the governor's. This was American politics. It was the same for the Coastal Patrol. In order to ensure the safety of his coastal area, Jiang Hai donated $6 million to the Coastal Patrol in 3 years, including 10 helicopters and 5 fast boats. The boat just now seemed to have been donated by Jiang Hai. When they saw Jiang Hai, they couldn't do anything other than laugh dryly. Now that they heard Jiang Hai's question, they couldn't do anything other than smile. Looking at their appearance, the other two groups knew that they couldn't rely on these guys. Jiang Hai was truly their parent. When they saw Jiang Hai, they couldn't do anything other than laugh dryly. Now that they heard Jiang Hai's question, they couldn't do anything but smile. "Cut the crap. Who allowed you to fish here? How dare you fish for sharks? Someone reported you for illegal fishing and fishing for shark fins. Take out your fishing permits and search inside. If you find shark fins, detain this boat." Seeing that the Coastal Patrol was unreliable, the people from the Environmental Protection Agency looked at the people from the Fishery Administration. It turned out that the people from the Fishery Administration were really awesome. Seeing that the Coastal Patrol didn't stand up for them, one of the people from the Fishery Administration stepped forward and said arrogantly, "Search the boat? Let's see who dares." As soon as this person finished speaking, many people prepared to search the boat. However, Harriman Fells and Knerson Peters were not to be trifled with. They stood up instantly and blocked these people. These people looked at the 2 iron towers in front of them and unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then they looked at the Coastal Patrol. The people from the Fishery Administration were also equipped with guns, but now that the Coastal Patrol was present, they didn't dare to take them out. "Hey, let them search. It's like we're really fishing for shark fins. Let them search. Ai Dehua, take out our fishing permits." Seeing that they were ready to fight, Jiang Hai smiled and asked the 2 people to continue holding down the sharks. Then he walked in front of these people and motioned to Edward Anderson to take out the fishing permits. "Humph, at least you know how powerful we are. Search for me." Seeing that Jiang Hai gave in, this person also shouted loudly, "Search, it doesn't matter. You can even smash this boat, but I have to make it clear first. Do you see those floating boats over there?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Then he pointed to the floating boats in the distance and said to these people in front of him. Looking at the floating boats that Jiang Hai pointed to, these people also looked over. The guy from the Fishery Administration who was the leader felt his heart skip a beat. "See? Let me tell you, the area circled by the buoy is my fishing ground. That is to say, where you are now is within the scope of my fishing ground. According to the laws of the United States, this ocean is mine." Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai continued to say with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person felt his heart beat twice for no reason. The United States was indeed particular. Fishing required a fishing permit, but there were exceptions. If the river or the sea belonged to someone else, then it was his property. He could do whatever he wanted with it. It was like someone bought a house in Huaxia and then made bread and dumplings in his home. As a result, the government came. What right did he have to make dumplings? What about the New Year? Who allowed him to make dumplings? Was it inexplicable? Not to mention that Jiang Hai was fishing here. Even if he caught all the fish here, it had nothing to do with them because this was Jiang Hai's. "I am a reasonable person. I'm a very reasonable person. You've entered my fishing grounds without a search warrant. You'll definitely lose your job and lose your job. I'll definitely sue you until you lose your job. Now, let's see if you can find the shark's fin that you're talking about. If you can find it, you'll just lose your job because this sea belongs to me. If you can't find it, then you're framing me. Let's not talk about other things, but you'll definitely have to go to jail. Looking at the people from the Fishery Administration, whose faces were already quite ugly, Jiang Hai continued to say with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person's legs went soft. He knew that he was finished. He looked at the two groups of people behind him for help. The Coastal Patrol team naturally pretended not to see it. Now, even if Jiang Hai asked them to testify, they would testify for Jiang Hai. These people from the Fishery Administration had nothing to do with them. As for the people from the Animal Protection Association, many of them took a step back. Now these people were cursing in their hearts. What the hell? What the hell was this? How did this place become someone else's? This person was fishing in his own home. Even if there were poisonous fish, it had nothing to do with them. This time they even brought people from the Fishery Administration and the Coastal Patrol team. This time they had completely offended these people. We are not from the Fishery Administration. You can't threaten us. You are a murderer. Whether you find shark's fin here today or not, you will be condemned by your conscience. Don't tell me you don't know that 8 killer whales died here a few days ago. Just when this person from the Fishery Administration was completely disheartened, a person from the Animal Protection Association stood up and said in a sharp voice. Hearing this person's voice, Jiang Hai also looked at this person. This person was a woman who looked young. Because she was very short, about 1.5 meters tall, she was dressed like a junior high school student. Looking at this girl, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows, then looked at his subordinates and laughed. Little kid, you have to understand one thing. You're standing on my territory now. Don't say that you have a bad conscience. What you're doing now is trespassing. Do you know what happened the last time someone trespassed on my territory? He was sunk to feed the fish. Looking at the girl in front of him, Jiang Hai grinned and said to the girl with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a trace of fear flashed in the girl's eyes, but she soon stood firm. You are lawless. You will be condemned by your conscience, you villain. Facing Jiang Hai, the girl spurted. Listening to her words, Jiang Hai picked his ears. It was inexplicable. He could only say these words now, because it was really inexplicable. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai decided to ignore this guy. At this moment, those people who went in to search came out. Unfortunately, they didn't find any shark's fin. Instead, they found some fish that Edward Anderson had just caught. They didn't know what Jiang Hai said to their leader after they went in. In their view, it was inevitable to take something from Jiang Hai because it was also called evidence. But as soon as they came out, they found that the atmosphere seemed to be a bit strange. Oh, another charge. It seems that you have to live in there for 3 to 5 years. Looking at the fish in their hands, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. These guys really cooperated with him. Chapter 977. What are you doing? What are you holding in your hands? Hearing Jiang Hai's words and looking at the things in his hands, the man from the Administration of Fishery was about to go crazy. He roared loudly. His subordinates were also a little confused. Boss, isn't this evidence? After hearing his words, an old man who might be on good terms with him followed him with some doubts. They used to do this every time. Evidence, my ass. I asked you to look for shark's fins. Where are the shark's fins? This is his own fishing ground. What does it have to do with you what he wants to catch? Why do you care what kind of fish he has in his boat? If you want to die, don't drag me down with you. Looking at his subordinates, Yu Zheng's veins bulged as he roared loudly. Hearing his roar, most of his subordinates were in a daze. However, some of them were quick-witted. Their hearts instantly thumped as they exclaimed, "We're finished." They had never expected that this fishing ground belonged to Jiang Hai, so everything here belonged to Jiang Hai. Not to mention that they didn't find any shark's fins. Even if they did, it would be useless, because the shark also belonged to Jiang Hai. This led to a very awkward situation. They went to other people's territory, checked their fishing permit, and then took away some fish, saying that this was evidence? At the thought of this, the subordinates who were searching the fishing ground almost slapped their own mouths. What was this? Did they kick an iron plate? No, this time they directly kicked an iron plate and their bones were fractured. You don't have to scream so miserably. You have to check your fishing permit when you enter private property. Dereliction of duty, you will lose your job by 1,000,000%. You framed me, stole my fish, framed me and stole. You may have heard that my lawyer is called Moses Adams. He's a good lawyer. With such conclusive evidence, it's quite reasonable for you to be sentenced to 3 to 5 years. Looking at the people from the Administration of Fisheries in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these people from the administration of fishery felt a chill in their hearts. They knew that this time they would lose their jobs and have to go to jail. No one doubted Jiang Hai's words because they knew where this place was, and they had heard of Jiang Hai. It was just that they didn't think that way at first. Who was Jiang Hai? Billionaire? Why would a billionaire fish for sharks on a boat like a fisherman? But now the situation was that this was Jiang Hai, so they were doomed. Clang. Some people couldn't stand it anymore. They threw down the things in their hands and lay on the ground with a defeated face. Hey, don't, you can't stand it? I didn't say that I would bribe the prisoners in the prison to teach you a lesson. This is just the beginning. I am the most benevolent person. If you are wrong, you have to admit it. If you are beaten, you have to stand up straight. It's that simple. Looking at these people whose faces were as pale as ashes, Jiang Hai shook his head and smiled. Their mental fortitude was too weak. Mr. Jiang, please be merciful. Seeing Jiang Hai scaring these people to death, the head of the coastal patrol team couldn't help but lick his lips, then hesitantly walked over and whispered to Jiang Hai, Mr. Jiang, please be merciful. But before he could finish, Jiang Hai interrupted him directly, Shut up. Who are you talking to now? Are you speaking to me on behalf of your entire coastal patrol team? Looking at this person, if the coastal patrol team didn't say anything, Jiang Hai might not say anything because there would be opportunities to cooperate in the future. But now he actually dared to plead for mercy. Did he think that he was doing the right thing? Sorry, I was reckless. When this person heard Jiang Hai's words, he immediately retreated. They couldn't even save themselves. How dare they plead for mercy for others? Jiang Hai wouldn't be polite to them. Okay, take the fish away. I have plenty here. Go back and have a good meal. Then wait for the court summons. It should arrive in a few days. Pay attention to your mailbox. Looking at the people from the fishery administration, who looked as if their mother had died, Jiang Hai said casually. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, most of these people's faces turned ashen. Americans didn't have the habit of saving money. Basically, more than 70% of Americans had loans from banks. They had loans for houses, cars, and everything else. In a situation where the economic conditions were not good, the fishery administration was a relatively stable job with a good income. Now Jiang Hai's lips moved, and they lost their jobs and had to go to jail. That meant they were directly bankrupt. Because they didn't have the money to pay off their mortgage, their houses would be taken back by the bank. If they didn't have the money to pay off their car loans, their cars would disappear and they would go to jail. It could be said that it was inevitable that their families would be ruined. Thinking of this, many people felt sad. Looking at Jiang Hai, the person who caused them all these troubles, they wanted to drag Jiang Hai down with them. But looking at the people around him in the coastal patrol, these people swallowed a mouthful of saliva. They knew that they had no way to take revenge. God, it was really unfair. People were like this. It was easy to forgive oneself but difficult to forgive others. Although Jiang Hai couldn't be said to have a heart of stone, these guys came to find trouble with him, so he definitely wouldn't be lenient. Looking at these people's behavior, he knew that these guys had done this kind of thing before. Now that Jiang Hai had dealt with them, he wouldn't be the least bit lenient. If it wasn't Jiang Hai today but some ordinary people, they could only suffer in silence. Their things would be confiscated, they would be fined, and they would even have to go to jail for a while. At that time it would be Jiang Hai whose family was ruined. Therefore Jiang Hai would definitely not be polite to these people. Are you done? If you are, go back and wait for the court summons. Get out of here. Seeing these people come out, Jiang Hai's face darkened and he said with a gloomy face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, whether it was the people from the administration of fishery, the people from the Environmental Protection Organization or the Coastal Patrol, they all got on their boats and fled. They had no choice, they had to escape. Because the next moment Jiang Hai might even sue them. However, among the crowd of people who ran away like stray dogs, the little girl who just shouted at Jiang Hai didn't show any fear. She still frowned and glared at Jiang Hai. But it was useless to be alone. Soon she was carried on a boat and then the 3 boats drove away quickly. Seeing the boats leave, Jiang Hai took out his phone and called Moses Adams. He was a man of his words. If he said that he would ruin their family, he would ruin their family. He was so annoying. Boss, what should we do with this guy? Seeing that everyone had left, Edward Anderson, who just came out, removed the hook from the tiger shark's mouth, pointed at the big guy and asked Jiang Hai. Let it go. Jiang Hai, who didn't intend to catch the tiger shark, waved his hand. Then everyone turned this guy over. If they let it go directly now, this guy would sink to the bottom of the water and die. So Edward Anderson deliberately let the tiger shark rest here for a while. When its eyes began to blink and its body began to become stronger, they put it down. As soon as it entered the water, the tiger shark directly plunged into Jiang Hai's fishing ground. But in less than 5 minutes, it ran out at a faster speed. What a joke, the idiot's patrol team was here. Come on, let's continue. Looking at the tiger shark disappearing under the water, Jiang Hai also smiled. What happened just now was a disaster for those people, but for Jiang Hai, it was just a small accident. After taking a break, they continued to catch the great white shark. While Jiang Hai continued to catch the great white shark, the 3 teams on the other side were also divided. Except for the people of the fishery administration who were now like walking corpses, the people of the coastal patrol team were extremely angry. You guys, what kind of information did you provide? They are catching fish in their own fishing ground. It's none of your business. Are you crazy? How dare you go to other people's fishing ground and tell them what to do? The captain of the coastal patrol team, who was scolded by Jiang Hai to the point that he didn't even dare to fart, also scolded the people of the Environmental Protection Organization. These people had no other choice but to lower their heads and look at him awkwardly. Although the Environmental Protection Organization was very arrogant and organized demonstrations all day long to oppose this and that, when it came to private property, how could they oppose it? After all, not everyone was like Huaxia's dog fans. Even if it was a dog bought by others, they would still dare to rush over, block cars and release the dog. These people had nothing better to do. At least these people still had some awareness of the law. They knew that this was not right, so now it was very embarrassing. Don't shout there. If you shout, it only shows that you have a guilty conscience. You clearly saw Jiang Hai catching marine creatures, but you didn't dare to catch him. Do people like you deserve the national emblem of Shionko? But just when everyone was silent, the little girl appeared again, still standing on the moral high ground, scolding the coastal patrol team in front of her. Oh, little girl, next time ask your boss to come out and talk. Also, you'd better go back and study the laws of our country. That fishing ground belongs to Mr. Jiang. He can do whatever he wants there and no one can stop him. You and I are guaranteed. Looking at the girl in front of him, the captain of the coastal patrol team said seriously with a gloomy face. You bastard, you are that guy's accomplice. You will all go to hell after you die. Well, as soon as he talked to her about laws and regulations, this guy wisely changed the topic to other things. These little girls are so unreasonable. Chapter 978. Be careful next time. If you cause me trouble again, I'll lock you up for 48 hours. Don't doubt my ability. Ignoring the girl who started to quarrel, it was obvious that she couldn't win the argument and started to play tricks. The coastal patrol officer pointed at the adults on the other side and said loudly before leaving with his men. The people from the Environmental Protection Association sighed as they watched them leave. Who was the one who provided the information this time? Isn't he setting us up? After the outsiders left, one of the people who were driving the boat complained unhappily. Actually, they wouldn't be able to take it if someone pointed at them and scolded them for a long time, let alone when they couldn't talk back. This time, not only did they cause trouble for themselves, but they also made the people from the Department of Fisheries the scapegoat. Thinking about it made them feel a little guilty. Humans were like that. Under such circumstances, they would start looking for excuses. In any case, the fault wasn't with them. There were too few people in this world who would reflect on themselves. They preferred to push the blame of their wrongdoings onto others. Now, these people were pushing the blame onto the person who provided the information. I didn't expect this guy to be Jiang Hai, sigh. The person who got the news also sighed a little awkwardly at this time and whispered in a low voice. Indeed, he also has a source of information. The source of the information was the small town where Jiang Hai and the others lived. Just like old Toby had said yesterday, everyone in the town knew that Jiang Hai and the others were there to catch sharks. Under such circumstances, there were bound to be some people who hated the rich who were unhappy with Jiang Hai. Why would he drive a big yacht and bring his subordinates to catch sharks? What was he pretending for? At the very least, they were very unhappy with Jiang Hai's behavior. Under such circumstances, some people wanted to make Jiang Hai look bad, such as the people from the Environmental Protection Organization. They didn't care if there was a reward for reporting the information, but they were very happy to see Jiang Hai suffer. However, they didn't expect that Jiang Hai would hear some hidden meaning in old Toby's words. He was different from ordinary Americans and Huaxia people in that he liked to deal with everything in the most pessimistic way. Since he knew that someone knew that he was here to catch sharks, he might as well take precautions. If something really happened, it would be troublesome. Although he wasn't here to get shark fins or anything, he still had to be vigilant. Therefore, when the boat arrived there today, Jiang Hai asked Edward Anderson to sail further in. You must pay attention next time. If you have any information, you have to verify the source of the information. Today's incident can't happen again. Seeing that this person also admitted his mistake, the leader of the Environmental Protection Organization here also said seriously, "Yes, it's my mistake this time. I mistakenly believed those fishermen. I knew that those guys were definitely up to no good." When the person heard the leader's words, he took advantage of the situation and said seriously. Hearing his words, everyone stopped talking. After all, the Environmental Protection Association was not an organization established by the country. They were only together to protect wild animals. Therefore, there wasn't much of a conflict of interest. They also didn't want to offend too many people because of this mistake. We can't just let this go. However, there were some people who didn't think so, such as the girl. Hearing that everyone was going to let this matter slide and no longer look for trouble with Jiang Hai, the girl was not going to do it. Orna, what else do you want? Kevin has already admitted his mistake. Listening to the unforgiving girl, the leader frowned and then said with some dissatisfaction. Although this is not an official organization, he also has to be dignified. I'm not talking about Kevin, I'm talking about Jiang Hai. We can't just let this go. We just saw that he caught a tiger shark. It's very likely that after we leave, he will take the tiger shark's fin and then throw its body into the cold sea. Even if we don't have evidence, we all know that 8 killer whales died in his hands. This matter can't just be let go. The girl waved her hand. Originally, she didn't want to find Kevin, the member who called everyone over after getting the information. She was eyeing Jiang Hai. She can't let Jiang Hai escape like this. Yes, in her eyes, Jiang Hai had already broken the law. It was only because he was rich that he escaped the punishment of the law. Now that she was here, she must represent justice, represent the moon, and eliminate Jiang Hai, this malignant tumor. Oh my God, Orna, you know he's a rich man. He's not destined to be punished by the law. Plus, that's his fish farm. He can do whatever he wants. The leader slapped his forehead and said helplessly. To him, this Orna was indeed a troublesome person. Although Orna looked very young and beautiful, she was actually 24 years old this year. She was born with a child's face and a huge face. Cough, it was just a child's face. There was nothing huge on her face. Time rarely left any traces on her face. This was not a disease. It was just that she was relatively young. Plus, she liked to dress up like a young person. She often carried a backpack. From the back, she might look like a high school student, but from the front, she looked like a junior high school student. But don't underestimate this girl. Although she was young, her IQ was quite high. At the age of 24, she already had a doctorate in life sciences from Princeton University. At the same time, she also had a master's degree in economics. According to her, the master's degree in economics was only because she needed to earn money to support herself. As for life sciences, she specialized in animals. This was her favorite field. Maybe it was because she had been in school for too many years that she became stupid. So, at the age of 24, she did not lack money. Secondly, she had a reputation. However, no matter what she did, she took things for granted. People in China were called dog fans or sheep fans, then she was an animal fan. She resisted any action that killed animals. For this reason, she even became a vegetarian. In the beginning, she even went around persuading her friends to be vegetarian. Her parents also wanted to be vegetarian. She even went to the slaughterhouse to demonstrate. Unfortunately, she was chased away and her friends became fewer and fewer. Later, she also understood that she could not stop others from eating meat because humans were also part of the environment. If humans really did not eat meat, then the food chain would collapse. So, later on, she did not stop others from eating beef, fish, or anything like that. However, she still loved wild animals. 3 years ago, she joined the Environmental Protection Association. Because she was rich and was a fanatic, she was very popular in the association. A few days ago, after learning that 8 killer whales had died in Jiang Hai's waters, she took it for granted that they were killed by Jiang Hai. Now that she heard that Jiang Hai was killing sharks, she took the initiative to ask for permission to participate in this operation. In the end, she came this time only to see the darkness of the world. In her eyes, Jiang Hai had no intention of repenting at all. Instead, he shamelessly took pride in it. Moreover, he used his identity as a rich person to suppress the people from the Administration of Fisheries and the Coastal Patrol. This really pissed off the young lady. She felt that if Jiang Hai was in front of her, she would eat him up. I'm going to find evidence of his crimes. This is not over. On the boat, Orna said with a righteous face. and the people who were with her helplessly covered their faces. Well, they couldn't control this young lady anymore. Okay, you go find evidence of his crimes. But before that we have to go back first. This time the matter is not small. It seems that the president will have to step in. Patting his cheeks, the leader said somewhat speechlessly. He was really tired. No matter how these people from the Environmental Protection Organization went back, Jiang Hai and the others had a good harvest in the afternoon. They caught 3 more great white sharks. In addition to the 3 from yesterday and the one they just released, Jiang Hai's great white shark navy already had 7. Although there was a big difference in size and age, Jiang Hai believed that with his aura training, these guys would inevitably grow very big in the future. Big Fool's size had basically reached its limit. It was about 12 or 13 meters. It couldn't grow any bigger. However, the sand tiger shark could only grow up to 3-4 meters, and the great white sharks could grow up to more than 6 meters or even 7 or 8 meters. Jiang Hai was still looking forward to seeing how big they could grow with aura. Maybe after a while, Jiang Hai could raise more than a dozen megalodon sharks. At that time, not to mention killer whales, sperm whales and humpback whales, even blue whales, Jiang Hai could command his navy to kill them. After catching 4 sharks today, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the town. It was only about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they left, but it was almost 9 o'clock when they returned to the town. Jiang Hai took Edward Anderson back to Toby and George's small hotel and had a good meal. After sending some food to Belle Lester and Harriman Fells, they went to sleep. The night was quiet. The next morning Jiang Hai paid for the room. Why? Because if there were no accidents, Jiang Hai and the others would go back today. They had already caught 7 sharks. Jiang Hai's goal was 10, but it didn't matter if there were less than 10. It was fine to have 8 or 9. Jiang Hai didn't believe that he couldn't catch one today, so he checked out in advance. They didn't have to come to this gloomy town tonight but could go home. After checking out and eating breakfast, Jiang Hai and the others set off again. Chapter 979. Oh, our luck is really good today. It seems that we might be able to go home before the sun rises. Seeing that Jiang Hai had caught the second great white shark in less than an hour, Belle Lester said with a smile. Hearing his words, although the others didn't say anything, the smile on their faces said it all. After today's work, everyone will have 3 days off. The reward is 10,000 yuan. Seeing that everyone was in high spirits, Jiang Hai also said. Seeing that Jiang Hai was so generous, his subordinates became even more excited. Amidst the laughter, the 4-5-meter-long great white shark was finally exhausted and was pulled to the side of the boat. Jiang Hai and the others also turned this guy over. After injecting spiritual energy into it, they removed the hook from its mouth and put it back into the water. After a while, when the spiritual energy began to take effect and the fish almost recovered, they put it back into the sea. This is the 9th one. Let's take a break and catch another one. After clapping his hands, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Seeing that it was only 2 o'clock, everyone laughed happily. In fact, Jiang Hai could have just let it go, but since there was still time, it was not a problem to wait a little longer. After resting for about 15 minutes, Edward Anderson rehung the internal organs of the cow and threw them into the sea. In an instant, a large number of fish gathered again. Compared to the number of fish outside of Jiang Hai's fishing ground, there were more fish in Jiang Hai's manor. After Jiang Hai decided to develop his new fishing ground, he began to spread the grass seeds. Of course, it was impossible to spread the grass seeds by boat. Now they had a plane. However, when he was preparing to develop the ocean, he used a boat to spread the grass seeds. It was quite slow, taking a month to spread the grass seeds. But now that he had the helicopter and the At-802F, it was much faster to scatter the seeds. He could just sit on the plane and throw the seeds down when it was flying at a low altitude. Then he could sit on the helicopter and fill in the gaps that he had not scattered. First, he soaked the seeds of the seaweed in seaweed, which was to let them germinate. Of course, while soaking, Jiang Hai had already injected spiritual energy into them. After the seeds sprouted, he directly took the helicopter and threw the grass seeds directly into the sea. These grass seeds contained spiritual energy. After entering the sea, they would take root in the sand and the survival rate was quite high. Generally speaking, it was good to have a survival rate of more than 60%. After all, it was grass. If it were other things, the survival rate would be less than 20%. However, Jiang Hai's grass seeds had a survival rate of more than 80%. The reason why they didn't survive was because they were eaten by fish. Jiang Hai couldn't do anything about it. Therefore, although it had only been more than a month, the seaweed and seaweed rooted in the sea had begun to play their role. First of all, Jianghai's sea water was getting colder and colder, but there were more and more fish. After Jianghai and Iron Bull discussed the fish to be raised this year, he had already started to put in the octopus and mullet a few days ago. These little guys would live here for a month and then they would become food for other fish. Jianghai and the others couldn't do anything about these small fish eating the cow's internal organs. They could only continue to wait. If they finished eating, they would put in another piece. After fishing, there would definitely be some bait to feed the fish. However, while they were waiting there, suddenly a black shadow slowly floated up from under the water. "There's something." Edward Anderson, who had been paying attention, saw the black shadow and said immediately. He then hid his head in the range of the boat, and at the same time, gestured to the others to keep quiet. "It should be." However, after glancing at it, Jianghai said with some doubts. His eyesight was much better than Edward Anderson's. These days he had seen a lot of sharks such as mackerel sharks, tiger sharks, great blue sharks and so on. However, the size of these sharks was not the same as the black shadow in front of him. Although this black shadow was also very big, about the same size as an ordinary great white shark, it was much sturdier. Looking at this fish, Jianghai scratched his head. His sixth sense told him that this should be a shark, but the color of the fish's back was somewhat similar to that of a shark. This made him a little confused. Just as he was thinking about it, Edward Anderson's expression changed. "This is indeed not a shark, it's a black tuna." When he said the last three words, Edward Anderson's eyes almost lit up. Hearing his words, Jianghai was also stunned for a moment. Black tuna? He was definitely not unfamiliar with this kind of fish. If the black tuna didn't understand, then everyone should know about the bluefin golden lance. There were a lot of bluefin golden lance in Jianghai's fish farm. Some were chased here by Big Fool, and some came here by themselves because they felt that the spiritual energy here was abundant. Therefore, there was a school of bluefin golden lance in Jianghai's fish farm. Jianghai didn't carefully count how many there were, but at least there were more than 100 of them, and this was only referring to the bluefin, yellowfin, masu and so on. Jianghai's fish farm was too big, so he had tens of thousands of bluefin golden lance without raising them. Last year, when the weather was still hot, he often went into the water to catch lobsters, abalones, prawns and so on. He watched the schools of bluefin golden lance eating herring or squid. The ecological balance in Jianghai's manner was quite unbalanced. It was completely dependent on his spiritual energy to surround these fish. If one day Jianghai's spiritual energy ran out, then his fish farm would be worthless. At that time he saw a lot of bluefin golden lance in the fish farm. He thought that after a few more years, the number of these little things would be even more. It was precisely because of this that during the fishing exhibition last year, Jianghai got 2 bluefin golden lance as decorations and were bought by the islanders. He didn't want to keep them as breeding fish because he didn't lack these things now. Now that he saw a bluefin golden lance, Jianghai didn't say anything. If it really took the bait, then he would eat it or sell it, but he couldn't let others know. After all, it was now the fishing season for bluefin golden lance. The bluefin golden lance in the water seemed to have lived for a long time. Although the cow's innards with spiritual energy were very attractive to it, it was still in a state of observation, watching the small fish constantly pecking at the cow's innards in front of it. Seeing that the cow's innards were getting smaller and smaller, but nothing happened, the fish couldn't stay still. Finally, the temptation of the cow's innards exceeded its many years of experience. It opened its big mouth and swallowed the remaining half of the cow's innards in an instant. But as soon as it swallowed it, it knew that it was bad. Because the corner of its mouth hurt, its mouth had been pierced. At this time, Edward Anderson also exerted force and retracted the line. Under the pain, the bluefin golden lance, which was originally going to drill under the sea, swam in a straight line toward the distance. However, Edward Anderson and the others were not to be trifled with. They let it swim, but they controlled the direction it swam in. It couldn't let go of the line if it swam straight, so it could only swim in circles. Under its struggle, its physical strength was quickly drained, and Edward Anderson also looked at it with a smile while constantly controlling the line in his hand. Finally, the fish couldn't take it anymore. After struggling for about half an hour, it helplessly listened to Edward Anderson's instructions and was pulled to the side of the boat. When it was pulled over, the people on the boat snorted. This guy was really a huge monster. The whole fish looked no smaller than a great white shark. The whole body didn't look carefully, but it was almost 5 meters long. The dark blue back made Jianghai and the others' faces almost cramp with laughter. "Get it up quickly." Seeing that the big guy was no longer swimming, Edward Anderson also said loudly, Tunas were the same as some sharks. They needed to keep swimming to breathe. If they didn't move, they wouldn't breathe and they would suffocate. The blood of the dead tunas would flow into their meat, so the fish wouldn't taste good. Edward Anderson was an expert. Although the others didn't know much about this, it wasn't a problem for them to follow orders. Harriman Fells immediately picked up the hook and hooked it onto the fish's body. Then he lifted it up. As mentioned before, Harriman Fells was born with great strength, but even so he couldn't lift it. Seeing that his friend couldn't stand it anymore, Knurse and Peters reached out to help, but the two of them couldn't lift the fish up. Seeing this, Jiang Hai had to step in. He walked directly to the hook and lifted it with his right hand. He was also a little surprised. The fish was really heavy, but it was far from the weight that Jiang Hai couldn't bear. Using his right arm, Jiang Hai directly lifted the fish up and threw it on the boat. Edward Anderson immediately pulled up the fish's tail with a lasso, then hung the whole fish upside down. After that, he killed the fish and let out the blood. After everything was done, Edward Anderson began to measure. But when the measurement was over, he couldn't help but take a deep breath because this guy was really terrifying. What's the data? Seeing that Edward Anderson was a little stunned, Jiang Hai also came over and asked. When Edward Anderson showed the data to Jiang Hai was also a little stunned and looked at him in disbelief. Boss, what should we do? Looking at Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson asked Jiang Hai with some hesitation. Do you still need to ask? Sell it? But Jiang Hai slapped his thigh. If we don't sell it, what's the point of keeping it? Chapter 980. That night, under the cover of the night, Jiang Hai took this huge tuna and drove to the dock of his fishery. Jiang Hai was sitting in the cabin, looking at the data in his hand with the help of the light. 87 meters long, 692 kilograms, a new world record. Looking at the data in his hand, Jiang Hai's eyes became brighter and brighter. After catching the tuna in the afternoon, Edward Anderson measured it and then loaded it into Jiang Hai's cabin. They recaught a great white shark before returning. Now Jiang Hai has two navies. One is Big Fool leading his wife plus 13 adult dolphins, and the other is these 10 great white sharks. Jiang Hai named them White 1 to White 10 according to the order of catching them. Now these guys have also gathered and began to patrol the fishery. Jiang Hai believes that as long as there is time, the growth rate of these 10 great white sharks will be amazing. As long as they grow up to 8 or 9 meters in length, Jiang Hai will not be afraid of anything in the future. The killer whale from last time? If they dare to come again, Jiang Hai dares to not let any of them run away. 10 great white sharks is a fixed task and now it is successfully completed, and the bluefin tuna is an out-and-out gift. But now this gift, Jiang Hai has to study how to sell it. With such a big tuna, Jiang Hai can't eat it, so he can only sell it, but there is a problem. Bluefin tuna is now banned in North America. He can't sell it openly, but he can sell it to the black market. First, he doesn't want to be involved with the dark world. Second, he can't sell it at a high price, so he still has some hesitation. But when he came back, he already thought about it. Since he can't sell it at a high price, he can use Prawalton to sell it. Of course, he and Prawalton are not using these two unpleasant words, but she can really help him. Jiang Hai made up his mind. He was going to wait for his fish to go into the freezer and call Prawalton. After a few hours of turbulence, Jiang Hai's boat arrived at his dock at about 9 o'clock in the evening. After arriving at the dock, there was no welcoming ceremony or many people. There were only two people here, one was Robbins Garcia, and the other was Philemon Turner. There were not even fishermen. This also showed the extent of Jiang Hai's trust. After the two helped Jiang Hai carry the fish off the boat, they covered it with a layer of black cloth and put it on the F-750. Then they drove Jiang Hai and the others back to Jiang Hai's mansion. At this time, no one was sleeping in Jiang Hai's mansion. When they saw Jiang Hai and the others carrying the big fish, they were stunned. This is a big guy. After putting it in the freezer, which specializes in freezing high-quality seafood, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. On the spot, Jiang Hai gave Edward Anderson and the others a bonus. As he said, each of them would get $10,000. But because they caught the big guy, the original $10,000 was tripled. Jiang Hai gave each of them a bonus of $40,000. As for Robbins Garcia and Philemon Turner, they were given $5,000 each. After all, they only drove the car. This was also considered as hush money. These people naturally had nothing to say about the money Jiang Hai gave them. Naturally, they would accept the money given to them by Jiang Hai. After receiving the money, these people went back to sleep. Jiang Hai took out his phone and called Prawalton. Hey Humph, be gentle, you littlest, put your tongue in. The phone rang a few times before Prawalton picked it up. However, as soon as he picked up, the voice on the other side made Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. Needless to say, she should be doing something shameful with her girls. Hey, I'm not bothering you, am I? Listening to the voice on the phone, Jiang Hai asked awkwardly. Of course I'm bothering you, but it's you. It doesn't matter. Tell me, why are you calling me? Do you miss me? Let me tell you, I recently found a few young models from Southeast Asia. That feeling, tiske, I'm saving the first time for you. If you have time, you can come and experience it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton was not shy at all. Instead, she said boldly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was sweating. This topic is really not easy to answer. I definitely miss you, but I just came back a few days ago. Naturally, I have to spend some time with my girlfriends. But if you have time, can you come to me tomorrow? Listening to the voice of Prawalton over there, Jiang Hai said a little embarrassedly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled. Okay, no problem, but can you tell me in advance, why are you looking for me? I can be prepared. Hearing that Jiang Hai was looking for her, Prawalton also asked with a smile. I caught a fish, a very big tuna. It's not good to say it on the phone, so Jiang Hai said it vaguely, but Prawalton understood when she heard it, and then responded on the other side of the phone. I'm just waiting for her to come tomorrow. Just a phone call made me feel a little excited. Hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai imagined the scene at Prawalton's place and couldn't help but shake his head. This woman is not easy to deal with. Go to sleep, I haven't tasted meat for several days. Indeed, Jiang Hai had been staying in the hotel for the past few days and didn't do anything else. Now that he was back, he naturally had to do something. Putting away the phone, Jiang Hai returned to the hall, but after coming back he found that only Delina, Marian, and Taraga were here, and the others were not there. Needless to say, they are preparing a surprise for him. Since the end of the bathroom that day, they have prepared a lot of surprises for Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai also found that he seems to have changed a little. He actually likes this thing very much. Now, when he heard that they are preparing again, Jiang Hai also walked into his room eagerly. As soon as he pushed the door and walked in, he was instantly greeted by a scene of beautiful women in front of Jiang Hai. Why use this word? It is mainly because the atmosphere in the room really has a feeling of spring. At this time in the room, Jiang Hai's girls were changing their clothes. Of course, some have already finished changing, such as Feng Yunqin and Ai Xiaoxi. After all, they have worn it before, so they changed very quickly. Some people are changing, such as Qijie, Qia, Aphrodite, and others, and some people have not changed yet. At this time they are standing there naked, thinking about how to wear the clothes. Today the theme prepared by Feng Yunqin and the others should be Huaxia elements, because at this time they are all wearing cheongsams, but not the kind of cheongsams with high slit, but the kind of cheongsams that are very short. The bottom of the cheongsams is even just above the thighs. When they move, the front and back curtains will move back and forth, and the scenery below is clearly visible. And because the cheongsams themselves are not made according to their figures, so there are big and small cheongsams, and they look more strange and beautiful. What are you doing? We are not done changing yet. Seeing Jiang Hai walk in like this, Qijie immediately pulled down the clothes that were half put on, and then said to Jiang Hai with a look of displeasure. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai took the initiative to move closer. We are already an old couple, what is there to be embarrassed about? Come, let me take a good look. Jiang Hai came to Qijie's side, hugged her in his arms and said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words and Jiang Hai's breath, Qijie was a little overwhelmed in an instant, but now she can't push him away, nor can she not push him away. After all, they are dressed like this to seduce Jiang Hai. Now that Jiang Hai has fallen into the trap, she naturally has to half push and half accept. Just as she was struggling there, Jiang Hai had already picked her up. Sometimes the communication between a man and a woman doesn't need too many words. Just like Jiang Hai, it is better to directly express with actions. Isn't it better? She patted Jiang Hai's chest coquettishly, and she let Jiang Hai do whatever he wants. This night is naturally a spring breeze. Although Jiang Hai can't achieve balance, it is not a problem to share the rain and dew. Everyone was busy from 9 o'clock in the evening to the next day. At dawn they officially fell asleep and slept until noon. If it weren't for Prawalton's arrival, Jiang Hai and the others might still be asleep. After a simple wash, Qia began to command everyone to cook, and Jiang Hai yawned and looked at Prawalton, who was sitting on the sofa with a smile. I am a little envious of you. TSK, look at these girls on your side. When I first saw them, although they were beautiful, they were not as beautiful as they are now. Look, it is really good for a woman's beauty to be watered by you every day. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. No one will say anything if you want to live here. Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai said calmly. That's right. No one will say anything if I move in, but if I bring a dozen girls with me, they will probably cut me into pieces. You little heartless girl. If you have time, remember to visit me more often. By the way, what's your purpose for calling me here? Smiling and patting Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile, but soon turned to the main topic. Come here. Jiang Hai also asked her to come here for a purpose. Without saying anything, he led her to the cold storage. Chapter 981. After the two joked for a while, Jiang Hai took Prawalton to the direction of the cold storage. Jiang Hai's house was very big, really big, including the cold storage below. The cold storage was divided into 5 rooms, each with different functions. The temperature was 5 degrees above zero, -7 degrees below zero, -15 degrees below zero, -30 degrees below zero, -30 degrees below zero, plus nitrogen. These 5 rooms had different temperatures, so they handled different things. For example, the 5 degrees below zero were for vegetables and fruits that were in season. Jiang Hai's manor had a vegetable greenhouse with many fruit trees, such as blueberries, cherries, and big cherries in the United States. These things were now also available in China, but the price was slightly higher. In the United States, these things were not very expensive. There was also cranberry, a small round fruit with bright red skin that grew on low vines. This thing was more of a dried fruit in China, but there were many in the north of the United States. It mainly grew in the swamps and wetlands of North America. It was said that the total planted area in the world was less than 40,000 acres. No one knew whether this was the case or not. In addition, there was also snake fruit, which was a kind of red and special apple. Of course, there were also grapes, but this thing was a matter of season. After these vegetables and fruits were ripe or not eaten, Jiang Hai would put them in the 5 degrees below zero warehouse, which could be stored for a few days. The 0 degrees below zero was the freezer. For example, some lobsters, abalones, and so on. This warehouse was basically a warehouse for precious seafood. There were many water tanks in this warehouse. Because the temperature was kept at 0 degrees, the water would not freeze, but it could also keep these seafood in a fresh state to the maximum extent. The -7 degrees below zero was for beef. Good beef needed to be eaten to get rid of the sourness. The -7 degrees below zero was just right, so it was specially for beef. The -15 degrees below zero was the freezer, just like the refrigerator at home. Any frozen chicken, frozen meat, and so on were all stored here. The -30 degrees below zero was the nitrogen freezer. Nitrogen was known to be able to cool down quickly. When it turned into a liquid, the temperature was nearly -200 degrees. Jiang Hai's place was naturally not -200 degrees. Basically, the role of nitrogen was to cool things down quickly. For example, some top-notch beef and seafood could only be frozen for about a week to 10 days, which meant that they had to be sold within a week to 10 days. If they couldn't be sold, the frozen meat would go bad. Of course, some people said that the frozen meat was actually frozen and melted, which was called frozen meat. This was a very common thing in China. In some supermarkets, if you saw some frozen beef, 90% of it had just melted, then it was called frozen. But in fact, this was a lie. The real chilled meat was really just killed and then wrapped in a layer of crisp ice to maintain the freshness of the meat itself. This was called chilled meat, and this room was specially used to preserve the high-grade products that couldn't be chilled. Freshly slaughtered beef or freshly caught fish, which probably could not be sold within 10 days, were directly sent here. With a spray of phlegm, the beef and fish would solidify instantly. It would take almost a few seconds for them to solidify. This way, the texture of the fish and beef would be preserved to the maximum extent. After they melted, although there was no way to sell them as frozen, they were still more valuable than frozen ones. When these 5 warehouses were built, Eduard Anderson and Robbins Garcia presided over it. They thought so at the beginning, but basically only the first 4 warehouses could be used now. Jiang Hai's beef and seafood were supplied all over the United States and even Europe. Of course, the royal family of Dubai was also included. His beef was only in short supply, but there was no time when it could not be sold out. Jiang Hai brought Prawalton to the freezer where the frozen food was stored. As the door of the freezer opened, the lights also lit up. Then, in front of Prawalton's eyes, a huge tuna appeared in front of her. Oh my god, this is a tuna? And it's a bluefin one. Oh my god, how big is this? Looking at the fish in front of her, Prawalton was a little incoherent. She looked at Jiang Hai in surprise and asked. Body length, 487, weight, 692. Looking at Prawalton's appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled. He knew that this number was indeed amazing, a new global record. But he knew that this fish was just an ordinary bluefin in his manner. He remembered that he should have seen a bigger one when he was diving. Oh my god, this is really a big guy. Touching the fish's body, Prawalton also muttered in shock. She often dealt with these big guys, but to be honest, it was her first time seeing such a big one. What are you going to do? Patting the big fish's head, Prawalton looked at Jiang Hai. I have to ask you about this. It was caught yesterday. Today is the second day. Can Walmart buy it? Otherwise, what else can we do? Shrugging his shoulders, Jiang Hai really didn't know much about this. It was better to ask Prawalton. Walmart will definitely buy it, but to be honest, it's a waste to sell it to us. This fish can't be sold by the weight, it can only be sold as a whole. In the United States, this fish is probably only worth about $400,000. Shaking her head, Prawalton said directly. Hearing her offer, Jiang Hai also curled his lips. Although $400,000 for a fish is not a small amount, it is definitely not a lot. But if it goes to Japan, this fish can at least be sold for this amount. Prawalton said while making a two gesture. Seeing her gesture, Jiang Hai also raised his eyebrows. $2 million? That's not bad. Then what are we waiting for? We should send this thing to where it should go. In fact, in Jiang Hai's view, tuna is the same thing. To be honest, the taste is really the same. He is quite happy to use it to cheat money from Japan. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled. I remember that you and I had discussed whether we could directly get a line to sell fish in Japan. I had already set up the line at that time. Now that we have this fish, I believe that our first shot will be very successful. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled and said, then showed Jiang Hai her mobile phone. There is a list of plans in her mobile phone. When Jiang Hai participated in the fishery exhibition last year, a Japanese businessman bought 2 of Jiang Hai's fish, and the price was not low. At that time, Jiang Hai asked Prawalton because in his impression, this fish was really not worth so much money. But later he learned that the price of this fish in the United States and Japan was different. After learning this news, Jiang Hai wanted to sell the fish directly to Japan, so he discussed it with Prawalton. Prawalton also said that she would try it. Unexpectedly, it was now useful. Prawalton, to be exact, the Walmart Group had already set up a line in Japan, but unfortunately they lost a lot of money before. Walmart actually entered the Japanese market in 2002. After all, the Japanese market was the second largest retail market in the world at that time. But after entering, they lost money for years, so they announced their withdrawal in 2005. Of course, the main reason was the withdrawal of their main business. It was impossible to withdraw all the money they invested there. At present, Walmart has more than 370 supermarkets in Japan. There are still supermarkets, but they are not as enthusiastic as before. Basically, they don't want you to make money, but you also don't want to lose money. At least, the brand of Walmart must remain in the hearts of the Japanese people. Last year, Prawalton took the initiative to ask about Walmart in Japan. Naturally, the senior management of Walmart also knew about it. Walmart's recent strategy was mainly to focus on Jiang Hai's beef and seafood. The expansion was quite good. Originally, only the northeast corner of the United States and some large cities sold Jiang Hai's beef. But now, some towns in the northeast corner of the United States are selling Walmart's beef. There are more big cities, including some big cities in the south. It can be said that Jiang Hai's beef had almost unified the high-end beef market in the US. Luckily, his beef was not the right product. At the same time, Walmart also made use of Jiang Hai's beef to attack other markets in Europe. Currently, Walmart supermarkets in the UK, France, Italy, and other countries also sell Jiang Hai's beef. The purchase rate is really good. Basically, after Walmart's beef is sold out in less than 2 days. The only country that is not interested in Jiang Hai's beef is Germany. This is because Germans like to eat pork. But in Asia, beef cannot enter the market. For example, beef cannot enter Japan. It is mainly because of the national pride of that country. They do not allow anyone to say that Jiang Hai's beef is better than theirs. Japanese beef is the best in the world. Jiang Hai's beef? They are not interested. Alright, the South Koreans were the same. In their eyes, Hanyo was the best. There was no one else who could compare to him. As for why they cannot enter Huaxia, it is because Jiang Hai and Chile sell their steaks in Huaxia. Secondly, Huaxia has high import tariffs on U.S. beef. Huaxia is an independent country, and they will not allow U.S. products to be dumped there. Although Jiang Hai is a citizen of Huaxia and still has his Chinese citizenship, his beef is from the U.S. That's why Walmart supermarkets do not sell Jiang Hai's beef in Huaxia. If Feng Yu wants to eat his beef, he can only go to Chi Li's 4 steakhouses. Having said that, America's low-grade and mid-grade beef could be imported into Japan. High-grade beef, like Jiang Hai's beef, was not allowed to be sold. But there might be a loophole for fish. Chapter 982. Jiang, in order to cooperate with your fish, we are going to hold an auction in the Tsukiji market. Your fish is the biggest advertisement. If you have time, you can go and have a look. After all, you also have to know how popular your fish is. As for your safety, you don't have to worry about it. I will also go, you can live with me. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. To be honest, when she saw Jiang Hai, she also had some impulses in that aspect. It's just that in the face of business, that impulse has long been suppressed by her. In her opinion, if this fish is successfully caught, then she will be very excited. If at that time Jiang Hai will accompany her. TSK. This, I have to study it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton pouted slightly. Then you have to think about it carefully. You know, we still need a few days to operate your fish, and we have to send it to the island without anyone knowing. This is not an easy task. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also took her out of the warehouse. In the afternoon, they naturally had a good meal at Jiang Hai's place. Prawalton didn't use it in the evening, but she called her men and was ready to take over the fish at any time. In the evening, after Jiang Hai and the others exercised, they hugged Chi Jie and thought about what Prawalton said. What's wrong? Still not sleeping, aren't you tired? Chi Jie, who was lying in the crook of Jiang Hai's arm like a kitten, asked softly. She was the first one to do that, and now she had already woken up from her nap. Well, you sleep first. Looking at Chi Jie, Jiang Hai smiled at her, then gently patted her pink back and said to her. But after hearing Jiang Hai's words, Chi Jie didn't sleep. She propped up her body and looked at Jiang Hai. Say it, what do you want? You're a person who wears everything on your face. You don't have any shrewdness at all. But that's what I like about you. Looking at Jiang Hai, Chi Jie said with a smile. Oh, it's like this. Hearing Chi Jie's words, Jiang Hai sighed, and then told Chi Jie what he said to Prawalton today. Of course, he didn't say that Prawalton asked him to live with her. He just said that Prawalton wanted him to see it with his own eyes and examine the Japanese market, which is good for his future fishing business. Jiang Hai has a lot of fishing business in the United States and Europe, but fish is different from beef. Beef has a very clear grade. What kind of beef is sold at what price, this is fixed. But fish has no fixed price, only a fixed low price. Jiang Hai's fish is really good, now the price is high and people are rushing to buy it, but what will happen after a long time? What if Jiang Hai's supply is big? If they can't sell it in North America, they can send it to Europe. What if the Europeans don't recognize it? The domestic line is destined not to be too wide, because the domestic tax on Jiang Hai's fishing industry will be heavy. Take Jiang Hai's fish for example. If he sold it at retail for $50 a kilo, which is 150 renminbi a kilo, the customs there would charge him 40%. Do you believe it? Therefore, when Jiang Hai sold fish, the quantity was very small. He takes the high-end route. The low-end Jiang Hai's money is not enough to pay the tax. If the tax is added to the fish, he will sell white pomfret for nearly 240 renminbi per kilogram. But Jiang Hai wants to ask, is there anyone in China who buys white pomfret for 240 renminbi per kilogram? Jiang Hai was also a very patriotic person in He Kingdom. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept his current nationality. Moreover, he helped He Kingdom to connect with Du Feimin. But he couldn't possibly lose money. People are selfish. Jiang Hai doesn't know if he will take the money to support society when he is old, but at least not now. This is also the reason why it is difficult to see those high-end seafood in the restaurants of ordinary people. But the Japanese like to eat fish, and the fish they consume every year is far more than the people in their country. What's more, it is still very popular with tourists such as sushi houses which are really popular. Under such circumstances, only the Japanese can sell at a high price. This, while you go. After thinking for a while, Chi Jie said to Jiang Hai, why didn't you stop me this time? Looking at Chi Jie, Jiang Hai looked at her with some doubts. It shouldn't be. Stopping you depends on the matter. You forgot that I always hope that you can be busy with your career. For example, the livestock exhibition industry in San Antonio is not that important. It's okay if you don't go or let Robbins Garcia go, but now it's an expansion of overseas business. More or less you have to go personally. Otherwise, how can you rest assured? Anyway, I'm worried about Prawalton. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Chi-Jie rolled her eyes at him and then said with some bitterness. Then let's go together. I just haven't been to Japan. Have you guys not been there? Hearing Chi-Jie's words, Jiang Hai smiled a little awkwardly and then nodded. Since she said she wanted to go, then everyone should go together. We don't want to go. We won't go. We know that those Japanese are quite unfriendly to you. After all, you've slapped their faces on the beef. If we go there, we'll probably bring you some trouble. If they kidnap us, we'll be in trouble. I don't trust Pra Walton's bodyguard. You'd better go with Azalina. If anything happens, it'll be easy for you to escape. Hearing Jiang Hai's proposal, to be honest, Chi-Jie was indeed a little tempted, but soon she shook her head. A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. If it wasn't because Jiang Hai really wanted to see the market there with his own eyes, she estimated that Jiang Hai would not go. Just as she thought, Jiang Hai is a homebody. He really has no interest in Japan. What? He can go and see those teachers who taught him and experience the customs of Japan? Jiang Hai now has more than 20 girls around him, and all of them are quite obedient. They will do whatever he wants them to do. They will pose whatever he wants them to pose. Under such circumstances, is there a need to experience the customs of Japan? Jiang Hai is crazy. He is really not the hungry man now. He is now a full man. A full man? Well, he is indeed a little full. Therefore, Japan for him is really not that tempting. Okay, I will go early and come back early. Anyway, the auction will not take long. Hearing Chi-Jie's words, Jiang Hai also nodded and said to her seriously. When Chi-Jie heard Jiang Hai's words, she also hugged Jiang Hai and fell asleep. Jiang Hai took out his mobile phone and sent a message to Pra Walton. He needs to let her handle this matter first. The next morning when Jiang Hai woke up, Pra Walton was already prepared. The procedures, the plane, the airport, the time of departure, everything has been arranged. They are just waiting for Jiang Hai to wake up and then go to get the fish. The next thing is very simple. It is not the first time Jiang Hai went out, so he is naturally familiar with it. Soon Jiang Hai's people were set. Jiang Hai, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley, 3 people. The reason why it is so simple is that they are going to Japan. If the people of this country want to deal with Jiang Hai, it is useless to have more people. At that time it will be troublesome. And these 3 people, it is very easy for any one of them to escape, especially Jiang Hai. It is very easy for him. He also believes in Azalina and Wallace Shelley's skills. The second reason is because they are only going for a few days. According to Pra Walton, including today, they will only stay in Japan for a total of 4 days. The 4th night is the time of the auction. On the 4th night or the 5th day they can come back. It is just that they are going for a few days and Pra Walton will definitely have a lot of bodyguards. After everything was booked, Jiang Hai and the others set off. They drove an F-750, which was responsible for transporting the fish. After the fish arrived at the airport, they handed it over to Pra Walton's people. Although the fish were chilled, Pra Walton's people used frozen bluefin tuna strips. This way Jiang Hai's fishing time was vague. This was their way of doing things and Jiang Hai couldn't learn it. After the fish got on the plane, Jiang Hai and the others also got on Pra Walton's private jet. Well, to be exact, it should be the Walmart Group's private jet for Pra Walton. This jet belongs to the family, but if Pra Walton is still in power, the family will let her use it for free. This is also one of the high-level benefits. After getting on the plane, Jiang Hai can't help but exclaim. He also bought a private jet, but it hasn't been delivered yet. But even if it is delivered, Jiang Hai will probably feel that his jet is far worse than Pra Walton's. It's not about the price. Although the models were different, Jiang Hai's plane was one of the most expensive private jets. It was much more expensive than Pratt & Walton's plane. Jiang Hai's plane was only affordable by super rich people. Jiang Hai's plane was only affordable by super rich people. But Pra Walton's decoration really made Jiang Hai's eyes red. Well, it is indeed red and gold. As soon as he entered the cabin, he saw the color red and gold everywhere. If he didn't know, he would think that Pra Walton made a fortune by mining coal. It is really hard to imagine that such a rich socialite likes this color. It is really incomprehensible. Chapter 983. However, although the color would make people complain, he had to admit that Pra Walton's plane decoration was really like a bug. The plane was divided into 2 floors. The lower floor was the cargo hold, where Jiang Hai's fish was, and the upper floor was divided into 4 parts: rooms, lounge, hall, and entertainment room. Jiang Hai didn't go to other places because the hall was just inside. As soon as he walked into the hall, Jiang Hai couldn't help but give a middle finger in his heart. This hall was really quite unique. The sofas in the hall were fixed on the two sides in the back of the cabin. There was only one row. Of course, the sofas were the best sofas. You can lie down and turn around. Everything was electric. If you want to watch the clouds, you can watch the clouds. If you want to watch the front, you can do anything you want except for doing a handstand. In the middle of the hall there was a projection TV. It was the kind that projected from the bottom to the top. It was an enlarged version of the 3D TV in Jiang Hai's house. As for the sides of the TV, there were 8 steel pipes. When Jiang Hai saw this thing, he looked at Prawalton. Prawalton smiled and winked. For her, when flying in the air, she naturally wanted to find some fun. After boarding the plane, before the plane took off, she took Jiang Hai and the others to have a look. It had to be admitted that Jiang Hai's plane could be considered as a commercial plane. After all, there were many people. And this plane was Prawalton's other house. The rooms behind the hall were not small, and each of them had a separate bathroom. In the lounge there was a small swimming pool. Of course, when taking off and landing, the swimming pool would be covered by a glass plate. Otherwise the plane would be flooded. In addition to the swimming pool, there were various fitness equipment, even yoga balls and indoor tennis. Almost everything that one could think of was available here. The entertainment room was similar to the hall, but it was smaller. It was suitable for people to play when there were fewer people. There was also a fixed wine cabinet. It seemed that Prawalton used to play with some beautiful girls and drink wine in the sky. This was really a holy place in high school. Hey, two ladies, do you mind watching some programs? After visiting various places, Prawalton took Jiang Hai and the others to sit on the sofa. When the plane took off, Prawalton smiled and asked Azalina and Wallace Shelley. Although she was also very interested in these two girls, they were Jiang Hai's people. She wouldn't take the initiative to take the initiative. Hearing her words, Azalina shrugged and said indifferently, "Whatever, this is your territory. Come on up, be more hospitable to our guests." Hearing Azalina's words, Prawalton also clapped his hands, and then 8 stewardesses came out from the cabin in the distance. Jiang Hai also saw these stewardesses when he boarded the plane, but at that time they were still dressed very well. Although they were wearing stewardess uniforms now, except for the hats on their heads, they were basically changed. Their upper body was changed to one that exposed their navel, and at the same time the front was open to the V-neck, the bottom was changed to a small skirt, and the bottom was changed to a variety of silk stockings, white, black, transparent, and flesh-colored. After the 10 stewardesses came over, 8 of them stood in front of a steel pipe. With the sound of music, the 3D TV also began to play some stimulating music, and these stewardesses also danced to the music. There were 2 stewardesses who were waitresses. One of them walked to Jiang Hai with a smile on her face. "Sir, what would you like to drink?" Looking at the stewardess in front of him, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and asked for beer. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the stewardess did not rush to leave, but said to Jiang Hai, "I suggest you try sake, it is also a specialty of our destination, Dongjing. It is indeed a pity if you don't try it." "I've drunk it, but I'm not used to the taste, I'll have beer." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the stewardess also smiled and went to the back. Not long after, she came back with a bottle of beer and took the initiative to open a bottle. Jiang Hai was just about to take it, but she suddenly sat in Jiang Hai's arms, and then took a sip in front of Jiang Hai, and then pouted at Jiang Hai. She wanted to give it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai smiled and did not care. He directly grabbed the beer bottle and took a sip. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not kiss her, the stewardess also smiled. After swallowing the beer, she still did not stand up and sat on Jiang Hai's lap. "I'm very curious, what is this gentleman's name?" "On this plane, to be exact, in this cabin, there has never been a man. Of course, the captain and co-captain are men, but they can't come in." Looking at Jiang Hai, the stewardess asked with a puzzled face. This is also one of the harem of Prawalton, but the restrictions are not as strict as in her home. She only asked that if the stewardess on the plane is not allowed to have a relationship with a man outside the contract period or have a boyfriend. Of course, it does not mean that they will die of old age on the plane. If they have a boyfriend, they can apply. After receiving 1 year's salary, they can leave the flight team. Such a contract is very generous. "Oh, my surname is Jiang." Hearing that he may be the first male guest on this plane, Jiang Hai is also very happy. He chuckled and introduced himself. But just when he finished, the stewardess already knew who this man is. The legendary Jiang Hai of Winthrop. Perhaps for others they have heard of Jiang Hai but not Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai is not that important to them, but for this woman she is very clear about Jiang Hai. Because she knows that Jiang Hai is the male host of this plane. Many people know that Jiang Hai domineeringly said that Prawalton is his woman at the Walton cocktail party. Although there is no title, people who follow Prawalton know that Jiang Hai is very important to her. I didn't expect you to be Mr. Jiang. After knowing Jiang Hai's identity, the woman's body is closer to Jiang Hai, and her hands unconsciously increase the strength. Her pair of eyes looking at Jiang Hai are shining, and her well-developed breasts are directly pressed against Jiang Hai's chest. Feeling the elasticity, it should be real. Hey girls, work harder. This is the only man I allow you to have sex with during work. If you really feel uncomfortable, go to him. At this time, Prawalton came over with two stewardesses who were dancing just now. Obviously she has been enjoying this for a long time. At this time, one of her hands reached into the top of the stewardess on the left, and the other hand into the skirt of the stewardess on the right. Needless to say, she knows what she is doing. Seeing that the stewardess is trembling when she walked in front of Jiang Hai, kicked the stewardess on Jiang Hai's body with her high-heeled foot, and then said loudly. When they heard that Jiang Hai is the only man they can touch, the 10 stewardesses' eyes lit up almost at the same time. After all, they haven't tasted meat for a long time. Prawalton recruited stewardesses. Unlike her followers, the requirements are C. She recruited stewardesses who are beautiful, have a good figure, and are loyal to the contract. She didn't care if they had a boyfriend before. Therefore, whenever these girls heard the word man, they would go crazy. Well, why are we still wasting time here? Hearing Prawalton's words, the girl sitting in Jiang Hai's arms sat up straight, and then took off her coat. In an instant, two indescribable things jumped in front of Jiang Hai. At the same time, her two hands were constantly undoing Jiang Hai's pants. Maybe she felt that it was about time. The stewardess directly got on the horse and the battle began. Hey, aren't you going to play? Looking at the fierce battle over there, Prawalton also sat next to Azalina, then opened her legs and sat down. Naturally, a stewardess came over to help her lick some indescribable places. We have fun every day, so we don't care about this time. Hearing her words, Azalina chuckled. What she said was also true. Since the last layer of relationship with Jiang Hai was broken, Azalina and Jiang Hai really spent a lot of time together. In addition, she was originally an agent, so her needs in that area were not too strong, so it was okay. As for Wallace Shelley, she was now in a state of work. She had to look up information. As for Jiang Hai, it didn't matter. Jiang Hai's body was so good, they had plenty of opportunities. Then in the next few days after arriving in Dongjing, I won't be polite. Hearing the words of these two girls, Prawalton also said with a smile. At the same time, her eyes also looked at Jiang Hai, revealing a hint of excitement. Chapter 984. Get up and wash up, we're almost there. Leaning against the door of the room, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also raised his head from a pile of pink arms and legs, then fell heavily on the pillow. You really didn't treat your employees well, they are too crazy. Looking at the ceiling, although he just slept, Jiang Hai still felt a little tired. He came to help Prawalton to comfort her employees. I'm quite good to them, but some things can't be replaced, don't you think? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a chuckle, then walked out of the room. Jiang Hai also woke up the girls around him one by one, and then went into the bathroom to wash up. After 10 minutes, Jiang Hai came out very energized. Although he was still yawning, he had basically recovered. When he came out, the girls were gone. It seems that they have their own bathroom. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai stretched and walked out of the room. You're up, what do you want to eat? Walking into the hall, he saw that Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing Jiang Hai, Prawalton asked him. Oh, anything is fine, a sandwich or noodles. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded, then walked to the seat next to her and sat down. Prawalton had already clapped her hands and called a flight attendant who had just put on her clothes. Compared to their clothes just now, they have now changed back and became well-dressed. After all, they were about to land. Give him a bowl of ramen and a sandwich. Hearing Prawalton's order, the flight attendant also smiled and went to the back. Not long after, she came out with a plate with a large bowl of ramen and 4 cut sandwiches. Let me feed you. Putting the things in front of Jiang Hai, the flight attendant smiled and bent over, showing her surging upper body in front of Jiang Hai, and said softly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled awkwardly, then shook his head. Forget it, I'll eat this myself. Looking at Jiang Hai's embarrassed look, the flight attendant couldn't help but laugh. Will you take this flight when you go back? Looking at Jiang Hai eating noodles, the stewardess didn't care. She directly sat on the armrest of Jiang Hai's sofa. With a smile on her face, she looked at Jiang Hai, who was wolfing down the noodles, and asked, this? Hearing the flight attendant's words, it wasn't difficult for Jiang Hai. They didn't have enough time with him. You will also sit when he comes back. It's a benefit for you. But before Jiang Hai could speak, Prawalton over there agreed for him first. When she heard Prawalton's words, the flight attendant couldn't help but cheer in a low voice. What kind of clothes do you like or fancy? You tell me, I'll go and study it with them. Looking at Jiang Hai, the flight attendant said with her eyes shining. Hearing what the flight attendant said, Jiang Hai was embarrassed. What is this? Fortunately, the plane didn't fly slowly and finally let Jiang Hai get rid of the girl who wanted to communicate with Jiang Hai again. As the plane slowly landed, Jiang Hai and the others also arrived at Haneda International Airport in Tokyo. When the plane stabilized, the plane also connected to the covered bridge. Jiang Hai, Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley also walked out of the special passage. But just out of the covered bridge, Jiang Hai saw more than a dozen bodyguards. There were black, white, and yellow people wearing black suits and sunglasses, standing quietly on both sides of the passage. Needless to say, these people were here to protect Jiang Hai's safety. They should be Prawalton's people. Don't worry, I know there are a lot of people in Japan who want to cheat you. I have arranged everything. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still very calm. Soon, when Jiang Hai and the others walked out of the airport, the people in charge of cargo had already taken out Jiang Hai's fish and the things brought by Prawalton this time. This time, the things they brought were not only Jiang Hai's fish. There was also Jiang Hai's lobsters. All of them were of the highest quality. The highest quality abalones, the highest quality lobsters, the highest quality tuna, the highest quality salmon, the highest quality sea cucumbers, and so on. The purpose of this was to open the Japanese market. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to open the door of a country for Walmart with just the bluefin golden gun. Hello, Miss Prawalton, I am Nakamura Masa, one of the people in charge of Walmart in Japan. Welcome for your guidance. While Jiang Hai and the others were waiting for the goods to be loaded, a middle-aged Japanese man ran over while gasping for breath. When he arrived in front of Jiang Hai and Prawalton, he did a 90-degree bow without saying a word. His hands were firmly attached to his trousers, and his feet were side by side. After he got up, he introduced himself. Hello, who is Nakamura Tetsuya to you? Hearing this man's words, Prawalton looked at him coldly and said. For Prawalton, except for Jiang Hai, she looked at all men coldly. Sometimes, it was easier for a woman to talk business with her than a man. She seemed to have a natural attitude of rejecting men. Hearing Prawalton's words, Nakamura Masa continued to bow and said humbly, It's my father. My father has already prepared a hotel and a banquet for you. Please come. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but whisper in his heart. He had to admit that at least on the surface the Japanese people were flawless. It was said that it was difficult to slap a smiling face. When these guys saw others, they bowed 90 degrees and spoke very respectfully. Of course, no one knew what he was thinking in his heart. Maybe he was cursing Jiang Hai and the others in his heart. Sorry, I have to say no to his kindness. This is Mr. Jiang Hai, our company's most important partner. Because he has an unpleasant past with some Japanese families, it is difficult for us to trust a local hotel. I have already booked a hotel. If you don't mind, please invite your father to the hotel to discuss. Prawalton listened to Nakamura Masa in front of her and said very calmly. Then she took Jiang Hai's arm and got into a Rolls-Royce that had already driven over. Azalina and Wallace Shelley naturally followed. Azalina sat in the co-driver's seat, while Wallace Shelley sat beside Jiang Hai. Seeing Jiang Hai and the others leave, Nakamura Masa didn't have any objections. He just bowed all the way and respectfully sent off Jiang Hai and the others. After Jiang Hai and the others left, Nakamura Masa raised his head and muttered a few words. Then he took out his mobile phone and called his father. He didn't dare to discount Prawalton's words. At this time, Jiang Hai and the others were shuttling through the streets of Dongjing. Although Jiang Hai was very reluctant to admit it, Dongjing was indeed a very prosperous city. According to the world rankings, Dongjing could be ranked in the world's top 3 in terms of economy and population. After all, Japan was only made up of a few small islands. Whether it was resources or development space, it was very narrow. Therefore, their strategy was to gather the resources of the whole country to develop Dongjing. It turned out that they were right to do so. With the development of Dongjing, the other surrounding countries slowly followed. According to the words of a great man in China, this was called letting some people get rich first. Later, South Korea also adopted this method. South Korea was mainly their capital. The other places slowly developed after the rise of the capital. Jiang Hai had also been to the capital of South Korea, but to be honest, it did seem to be worse than Dongjing. From the airport to the city, the faster they walked, the more high-rise buildings Jiang Hai saw. Dongjing could be regarded as one of the fastest cities in the world. Basically, on the streets of Dongjing, almost everyone walked very fast. Almost everyone trotted across the street when the traffic light turned green. To be honest, Jiang Hai, who was used to the slow pace of life, was a little uncomfortable. Dongjing is like this. The pace of life here is faster than New York. Maybe it's because of the frequent earthquakes in Japan, so the safety of the people is not enough. They can only relieve their anxiety through work. You haven't been here at night. Later we can come out and have a look. It's very interesting and crazy. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, Prawalton also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. He didn't have much love for Japan. Of course, in the past, his computer stored a lot of educational videos of teachers, which benefited him a lot. At least for many nights he relied on these things to get through. The car was not driving fast on the streets of Dongjing. Could be said that it was very slow. Although it was not the morning rush hour or the evening rush hour, it was not the kind of traffic jam that was completely stagnant. The car was moving, but the speed was basically about 20 miles per hour. The fastest speed was about 40 miles per hour, which made Jiang Hai a little impatient. But no matter how impatient he was, he still had to sit. Finally, the car slowly arrived at the hotel Prawalton booked. After walking into the hotel, they did not go to the elevator. Instead, they went directly to the back of the hotel. Prawalton lived in a small independent Japanese-style courtyard. Chapter 985. The small courtyard didn't look big, but it wasn't small either. There was a circle of bodyguards in black standing around. These people were here to protect the safety of this small courtyard. Inside the small courtyard, the pond, the rooms, everything was similar to the Japanese courtyard in the anime. After Jiang Hai walked in, he saw that there were a total of 6 rooms, 3 of which had collapsed and 3 of which had beds. How do you want to live? Anyway, you are going to live with me. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Although she also satisfied her cravings on the plane, sometimes it was like this. The more she satisfied herself, the more she wanted it. If it weren't for the fact that she had just arrived, Prawalton didn't even want to pull Jiang Hai into the room now. Here. After choosing, Jiang Hai chose a large bedroom and pointed inside. Azalina and Wallace Shelley lived directly next to this room. They didn't want to live with Jiang Hai these days, so they let Jiang Hai and Prawalton live outside for a few days. Well, let's clean up. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also laughed, and then motioned to the waiter who had been staying outside to come in and clean up. After all the cleaning was done, Jiang Hai and the others also moved in. Of course, before moving in, Azalina and Wallace Shelley had to check it again to make sure there was no problem before they were allowed to live. Where did you get these bodyguards? They are so powerful, beautiful, good in skills, good in figure, and rigorous in work. Tiske, I am a little envious. After Azalina and Wallace Shelley finished checking and left, Prawalton took off her coat and lay on the bed, smiling at Jiang Hai. They're not ordinary people. They're special agents trained in Ulan. Azalina escaped. After I learned about the situation, I went to buy them. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai briefly explained the origin of Azalina and the others. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton couldn't help but be stunned. You dare to use agents? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton didn't go into too much detail. The strength of agents in this world was obvious to all. Everyone knew that they were very good, but those who dared to use them were basically desperados. The real rich people didn't dare to use agents, especially the retired agents. Rich people were different from drug dealers or those in the gray society. These people dared to use agents because they knew that agents were double-edged swords. If they didn't listen to them, they could just kill them directly. However, rich people couldn't kill people casually. The same was true for businessmen like Jiang Hai, and these agents were basically very knowledgeable people. If you bought them, these people might collude in private and kidnap you when you went out or something like that. This was because special agents had no loyalty to speak of, especially those who had retired. Their organization was more like a mercenary group. They would listen to whoever paid them more. Because of this, special agents were quite unpopular in the bodyguard world. Prawalton didn't expect that Jiang Hai's people were all agents, and Jiang Hai trusted them so much. Don't doubt the people you use and don't use the people you suspect. This has always been my policy. I believe in them. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai also smiled and then lay down beside her. Jiang Hai was telling the truth, he really thought so. Well, with this thing of yours, I'm not afraid that they won't give in. Do you want to warm up first? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton didn't want to destroy Jiang Hai's internal unity, so she changed the topic and said with a smile. Didn't you have enough on the plane? Looking at Prawalton, who had climbed on top of him, Jiang Hai sighed. How can I have enough with you? Really, we only have a few days. We have to seize every minute and every second. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton patted Jiang Hai and said with a smile. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai didn't talk nonsense. He turned over and pressed her under his body. The war began like this. More than 2 hours later, the clouds dispersed. Jiang Hai and Prawalton, who was obviously full, walked out of the room. Boss, just as you entered the room, an old man from Japan came to see Prawalton, but the people outside said that you had already rested. You should still be waiting outside now. Hearing the sound of Jiang Hai and Prawalton opening the door, Wallace Shelley and Azalina also walked out of the room and said to Jiang Hai, "It should be Nakamura Tetsuya. Let's go." Hearing Wallace Shelley's words, Prawalton also smiled, and then freely took Jiang Hai and walked outside. When they just came out, they saw an old man and a young man sitting by the pond in the distance drinking tea. Seeing Jiang Hai coming out, the two people immediately stood up. Jiang Hai had seen one of the two people before. It was Nakamura Masa, and the other old man seemed to be in his 60s. He looked 70% similar to Nakamura Masa. It seemed that this was his father, Nakamura Tetsuya, that Prawalton mentioned. "Miss Prawalton, welcome, welcome." Seeing Prawalton, the two people narrowed their eyes and smiled. Nakamura Masa still bowed 90 degrees, and Nakamura Tetsuya was unlikely to bow 90 degrees, but he also took the initiative to bow about 60 degrees. To be honest, although Jiang Hai didn't like Japanese people very much, maybe no one in the Northeast liked Japanese people. But when he saw an old man bowing to him, he also felt a little awkward, so he thought about it and wanted to return it, but Prawalton saw it first and straightened Jiang Hai's waist. "You're in existence of a higher level than them, so just nod your head." Leaning in Jiang Hai's ear, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded. He really didn't understand these things. Sure enough, Jiang Hai just nodded. The two people didn't feel the slightest bit wrong. Before coming, they had already inquired about Jiang Hai's identity. The owner of the Soaring Dragon Manor, the current #1 beef supplier in the Western world, and also planned to seize the #1 seafood supplier in the Western world. His total assets were even tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, but because his assets were not listed, no one could know exactly how much money he had, but it was inevitable that he was more advanced than them. In their view, Jiang Hai should be regarded as the top existence at present, far from what they could compare with. It was already good that such a high-level figure could nod to them. In Japan and South Korea, age was indeed the key to measuring a person, but social status was also quite important. "I'm a little hungry, let's eat and talk." Seeing that Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya were so polite, Prawalton's attitude towards them eased a little, and she was ready to give them a chance to have dinner with her. "I've already prepared, this way please." Hearing Prawalton's words, Nakamura Tetsuya said with a smile, and then took the initiative to lead Jiang Hai and the others into the hotel. This Nakamura father and son were originally the managers of Shio Department Store. In 2002, Walmart bought 37% of the shares of Shio Department Store and became the largest shareholder. It entered the Japanese market, but later suffered losses for years and had to withdraw. But in 2007, my uncle was in power. He was a very extreme person, and he directly bought all the shares of Shio Department Store and then increased the dumping. Now in Japan, although Walmart is not making money, at least it's not losing money, and it can be considered to have made a name for itself. My uncle is very decisive in this matter. Looking at the two people leading the way in front, Prawalton also introduced the two people's situation. At present, these two people were relatively trustworthy. After all their assets were in Walmart. If they annoyed Prawalton, who was the current manager of Sam's Club, they would be in big trouble. Jiang Hai also met Prawalton's family. To be honest, Prawalton's father gave people the appearance of a defender. Walmart would not make a big mistake in his hands and it would only be stable. But Prawalton's uncle was a very aggressive pioneer. If Walmart did not make a lot of money in his hands, it would suffer a lot of losses. This was inevitable. It depends on the choice of Walmart's shareholders. At present, because of the relationship between Prawalton and Jiang Hai, Prawalton's father was slightly older, but who knows what will happen in the future. Following these two people, Jiang Hai walked quite fast. It didn't take long for them to come to a small Japanese restaurant, but at this time, there was only one table here. There were cups, bowls, seasonings and chopsticks on the table, but there were no dishes. After everyone sat down, Nakamura Tetsuya clapped his hands, and then a group of people came in from outside. The leader was a young girl, wearing the kind of kimono often seen on TV. After walking in, she first knelt in front of Jiang Hai, then took the initiative to take off her clothes. What the hell is this? Looking at this girl, Jiang Hai was a little confused. He didn't quite understand what it meant, but Prawalton's eyes lit up. He patted Jiang Hai gently under the table. Just watch. This thing is called female body shing. It is a very novel way to eat. Chapter 986. Female body shing? Looking at the Prawalton, Jiang Hai had never eaten this thing before, but he had heard of it before. According to legend, this thing first appeared in Japan. When it first appeared, there was a group of wolves howling. But after so many years, everyone gradually forgot about it. This was the first time Jiang Hai had seen such a thing. Minasan watashiva yuyu dianei hajimai, dasa oily pants onagai mwamasu. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at the girl here, the girl had already taken off her clothes. She knelt down and said to the people in front of her. At the same time, she was also showing her body. Jiang Hai's mind went through the girl's words. His Japanese was at half a level and he mainly learned it from some teachers. This girl should be introducing herself. Jiang Hai usually read novels with a plot. He was a person who was more sentimental. This girl, in Jiang Hai's eyes, was about 14 or 15 years old. More or less. Anyway, Japanese girls were indeed quite petite. It was hard to tell how old they were. They weren't very pretty, but they had a small round face and a slightly sharp chin. To be honest, they were very cute. When people looked at them, they would have the urge to protect them. Ravage her? Well, actually, it was about the same meaning. This girl looked very much like a teacher named Sakaguchi Miya. Jiang Hai had once read her works, but this girl was whiter than the teacher. Her eyes were also more watery. Her figure was very slender, not fat, not thin. He couldn't see her bones at all. She didn't have a single hair on her body. What surprised Jiang Hai the most was that this girl's upper body and lower body were pink and white. Of course, there was no hair on her body. This is the vessel this time. Her name is Yu-chan and she is 15 years old this year. She is specially trained to become a female. She needs to start training before her menarche at the age of 12. She is not allowed to have any hair on her body. She also needs to be soaked in fresh milk for 2 hours a day. There are strict requirements for her food and accommodation. At the same time, she has to have type A blood. Most importantly, she has to be of type C. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Please come in, Nakamura said softly when he saw Jiang Hai looking at this girl. Hearing Nakamura's words, the girl lay down on the table in front of her. Then a few middle-aged women came in. After carefully bowing, they knelt in front of the girl and placed things on the girl's body. Looking at this girl in front of him, Jiang Hai more or less felt that she was a bit perverted. This is not good. It's too insulting. Pulling Prawalton's clothes, Jiang Hai looked at her and whispered. To be honest, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, but Jiang Hai still had a bottom line. Mr. Jiang, you're wrong. This is also a job and they are willing to do it. The female body is also divided into different levels, but even the lowest level, the income is higher than the average manager. For example, Yo-Yo-Yo in front of us, the cost of each appearance is 17 million yen, equivalent to about 1 million yuan. This is already a high income in Tokyo. Although Jiang Hai's voice was not loud, the room was still too small, so it was easy for the two people in front of him to hear. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Nakamura also spoke to Jiang Hai in his half-baked Chinese. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say because the word willing blocked his words. In Huaxia, Jiang Hai had been taught that pornography, gambling, drugs, and so on were all evil. There was no such thing as voluntary. For example, in all the Huaxia movies and TV series, all the people in the brothel were forced to do so. They were sold and then forced to work as women in certain special jobs. So Jiang Hai was instilled with this idea since he was a child. But since he came to the United States, he found that things were not like this. In this industry, there were quite a few people who treated this as a career. They didn't think that there was anything shameful about doing such a thing. Instead, they liked it very much. They could make money and feel comfortable. There was nothing wrong with it, so Jiang Hai's worldview was quite subverted abroad. At this time, he really didn't know what to say. This was because he didn't know if this girl was really willing or not. If he were to make a move and she didn't want him, then Jiang Hai would be in an awkward position. Besides, he had only heard of it before. This was the first time he tried it so close. He felt a little lost if he didn't eat it. Soon, when Jiang Hai was in a dilemma, the middle-aged women over there had finished setting up. Then they bowed to Jiang Hai and walked out. After closing the door, Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya were still sitting far away, motioning to Jiang Hai to eat. Aren't they eating? Seeing that the two people didn't move, Jiang Hai looked at Prawalton with some doubts. Them? Don't worry about them. They won't eat with us. Let's add some seasoning. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton shrugged and said. The Americans were the least particular about the concept of hierarchy, but the Japanese were the most particular. No matter what they said, they wouldn't eat with the Walton family. Of course, banquets were an exception. They didn't have the status to sit at the table at such a private banquet. Prawalton was also used to this. After all, they treated everyone the same. Since Prawalton said so, Jiang Hai didn't hold back. He made mustard and soy sauce and some vinegar and poured it into his small plate. Although it wasn't as delicious as Chiya's, it wasn't very bad. After everything was done, Jiang Hai glanced at the girl in front of him. At this time, the girl's body was full of ingredients, mainly sashimi, all kinds of fish, lobster, sea urchin yellow, sea cucumber slices, prawns and so on. There were also some shelled crab legs and so on. In addition, there was sushi. Jiang Hai didn't eat sashimi because before he got the Dragon Ball, his stomach wasn't very good. After he got the Dragon Ball, he was naturally cured of all diseases. However, he still wasn't used to eating sashimi, so he didn't eat sashimi. Fortunately, the other party understood, so he cooked the prawns and other things except that the shell was removed. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai picked up a prawn with his chopsticks and put it on his plate to take a bite. I don't feel anything different. You have to eat this thing with sauce. Looking at Jiang Hai's expression that didn't have any special taste, Prawalton smiled and said to Jiang Hai, but hearing her words, Jiang Hai pointed to the plate in his hand. Isn't this sauce? I mean, you have to eat it with sauce. Just like this. Prawalton met Jiang Hai's gaze and chuckled, then used the silver chopsticks in her hand to pinch a protruding part of the girl's upper body that can't be described. Well, it tastes great, don't you want to try it? Prawalton said happily after putting it into her mouth and chewing twice. Why are you so disgusting? I don't eat that thing. Needless to say, Jiang Hai also knows what that thing is and immediately shook his head. Although he likes beautiful women, he is not a pervert. He doesn't have this kind of hobby. I don't believe that you haven't eaten it. You have eaten it with me. Those in your house, which one haven't you tasted? Prawalton said contemptuously to Jiang Hai as she rolled her eyes at him. Obviously, she thinks that Jiang Hai is pretending to be serious. That's different. Waving his hand, even if Jiang Hai talks about this topic, he still can't let it go. What's the difference? It's nothing more than her eating yours and you eating hers. How much is this girl's first time? Prawalton rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai and said to the Nakamura father and son. Leave it all to us, you don't have to worry about it, it's her honor. When they heard Prawalton's words, Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya bowed down in surprise. For them, if this small amount of money can make Prawalton and Jiang Hai happy, it is naturally the best, but Jiang Hai waved his hand. I said stop here, I'm not here to do this. Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai said seriously. He is indeed not a picky person, but he can't be so desperate, right? After all, as the old saying goes, you are like a demon before you fuck, but you are like a Buddha after you fuck. Although he didn't fuck just now, after all, he talked with Prawalton for 2 hours, and now he is not short of women. Well, it's up to you. Seeing Jiang Hai's serious face, Prawalton smiled. She likes to see Jiang Hai like this. Whether it is outside or on some battlefield, she can't resist Jiang Hai's orders. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai glanced at her, then picked up another shrimp and ate it. The girl, who had been lying on the table without moving, turned her head at this time and looked at Jiang Hai with a trace of gratitude in her eyes. Although in their line of work, sooner or later they would lose their first time, but if they could delay it by a day, it would be best to delay it by a day. She was really grateful to Jiang Hai. Chapter 987. President, the latest news, Jiang Hai has come to Tokyo. Just as Jiang Hai was enjoying the special Japanese dishes in the hotel, in a huge house somewhere in Tokyo, a man in a suit knelt in front of an old man in Japanese clothes and said with a serious face. After hearing his words, the old man just nodded slightly, then took the tea handed over by a girl beside him and took a sip gently. This Jiang Hai is really courageous. He even dares to come to Tokyo. Doesn't he know that he has offended us? Putting down the tea, the old man said indifferently. Hearing his words, the man in front of him lowered his head even more. He came with Miss Prawalton of the Walton family. The security measures are quite tight. Only the father and son of the Nakamura family can see them. Looking at the old man in front of him, the man said with a serious face, "Nakamura? Tell the people below that I want to see them." Hearing his words, the old man gently took a sip of tea, then chuckled and said very indifferently. He still had some confidence in the Nakamura clan, which was a fence-sitter. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know that someone was targeting him. In fact, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. When he came, he was already prepared to be targeted. He was not afraid of being targeted because his strength and level now can be ignored. Jiang Hai has never been in existence that can be easily bullied. After dinner, Prawalton specially brought Jiang Hai and the Nakamura father and son to discuss how to use these 2 days to promote. The time of this fish is limited, so promotion is naturally very important. According to Tetsuya Nakamura, the best way is to transport the fish to their store in Tsukiji Market and auction it directly there. That is to promote their store and sell it at a good price there. Of course, this has to be discussed by Jiang Hai. After all, there will be fewer customers. For example, some people who don't get along with Prawalton will not come, but the general big customers will not be a problem. Jiang Hai was also very calm about this. He actually doesn't care much about this. He doesn't care whether Prawalton uses his fish to advertise, because this fish is more of a test. The specific plan will be decided by Prawalton as long as he pays for it. Since Jiang Hai is easy to talk to, other things are naturally easy to handle. Soon the 3 people here had already discussed how to promote. Jiang Hai doesn't know much about these things, so he just sat there and rested. About an hour later, the 3 people also finished studying, and the Nakamura father and son left respectfully. "Let's go out and play." Watching the 2 people leave, Prawalton smiled and said to Jiang Hai, "Go out and play? Are you sure?" Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at her with some doubts. Jiang Hai himself knows that he is very unpopular in Japan. Now he wants to go out and play. Is he looking for death? Don't worry, there will be no problem. My security is top-notch. Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised look, Prawalton also said with a smile. Hearing that she said there is no problem, Jiang Hai has nothing to say. Follow her. He went back and called Azalina and Wallace Shelley. Of course, the security guards were also there, but they were in the dark. If Jiang Hai didn't look carefully, he wouldn't be able to see them. On the surface, there were only the 4 of them. When they came to the hall, Jio-sun had already prepared the car. "Where are we going?" Getting in the car, Jiang Hai asked Prawalton. He is really not familiar with this place. Although many otakus have the idea of going to Japan, Jiang Hai didn't have a chance to come here before. Now he disdains to come here, so he doesn't know much about Japan. On the contrary, Prawalton has been here several times. The night view here in Yodo is still very good. We have 3 choices. If you want to buy things and enjoy the night here, then go to Ginza. If you want to get some delicious food, go to Shibuya. If you want to go to Izakaya, then go to Shinjuku. After getting in the car, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "Where do you want to go?" Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai asked Azalina and others behind him. "It's up to you, but you'd better not go to places with too many people. It will be dangerous." When Azalina heard Jiang Hai's words, she shrugged, indicating that she didn't care, and Wallace Shelley naturally smiled and didn't say anything. "Then let's go to Shibuya first and then to Shinjuku." Prawalton raised his eyebrows at Jiang Hai and said with a smile, "Shibuya is a place name in Yodo. It was first established because of the Dongheng department store. In terms of commercial value, this place may be far less than Ginza, but young people prefer to be here. Shibuya is very noisy at night. There are many snacks here and many young people will play here." After Jiang Hai's car arrived here, the 4 of them got out of the car and came to Shibuya Central Street. As soon as they got out of the car, Jiang Hai had to sigh. The girls of this island country were really cold. In Japan, no matter the season, they had to wear skirts to school. At this time, it was almost the same on this street. There were all kinds of girls. They were wearing thick jackets, coats, and so on. After all, it was just the beginning of spring. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was winter, but they were basically wearing skirts below. Obviously, the sales of pants in Japan were not very ideal, especially for women's pants. During the day, Jiang Hai saw that the city was busy everywhere. At night, it was not much better. Even if they were young people, carrying the things they bought or touring around, their footsteps were quite fast. They had no intention of strolling after dinner, so Jiang Hai took a look and retracted his gaze. He began to pay attention to the snacks in Shibuya. As for the beauties of Japan, have you heard of the 4 major sorcery of East Asia? Thailand's sex change, South Korea's plastic surgery, China's Photoshop, and Japan's makeup. God knows what these girls look like after removing their makeup. In any case, Jiang Hai didn't want to see it. Moreover, he was still in the state of a semi-sage. It didn't matter if he didn't see it. It was better to pay more attention to the snacks. To be honest, the snacks in Japan were quite rich. Of course, there was no way to compare with China, but there were many snack bars on the street just like the night market in China. Jiang Hai originally didn't have much demand for women. It was mainly because of the effect of the Dragon Balls, but his pursuit of delicious food had always been there. Looking at these snacks, Jiang Hai's fingers were also moved. He couldn't help but walk over and take a look. When it comes to Japanese snacks, everyone basically has some understanding. After all, cartoons and such are often shown in them. There are also many such snack stalls in China. For example, tong luo yaki, which is honey mixed with bean paste filling in the middle. This thing is also a lot in China. In cartoons it is Doraemon's favorite. There is also wagyu fruit, which is a cold cake in China. There is nothing to introduce. Sushi rolls were a type of sushi, and there were many of them on the streets of Tokyo. Rice balls were actually similar to sushi rolls, but there was more rice in them and they were much cheaper. They were considered a relatively cheap snack. Taiyaki is similar to tong luo yaki, but the dough is made into a fish shape and the inside is also filled with bean paste. Octopus balls, this is Jiang Hai's favorite snack. He often eats them in China. Naturally, he wants to try the authentic one here. Tempura is fried prawns. Of course, prawns are the best. In addition to prawns, there are also vegetables and fish. In addition, there is also oden and fried chicken. Jiang Hai is not a fan of fried chicken. There are a lot of fried chicken in the United States, but he is still very interested in oden. Along the way, Prawalton is looking at the girls and clothes. Azalina and Wallace Shelley are looking at the surroundings. Of course, they will occasionally look at the clothes and such. As for Jiang Hai, he is simply looking at the food. First, he bought 2 boxes of octopus balls. Then he bought 10 skewers of oden. Then he bought a box of tempura. Finally, he bought a few teriyaki. To be honest, Jiang Hai didn't eat enough because he doesn't eat raw fish. On the other hand, the girl's body was basically full of raw fish. There was very little sushi and the like. It was impossible to put freshly fried fish on the girl's body. This was very inhumane. Therefore, Jiang Hai almost didn't eat anything. Now he was making up for it. They eat along the way. When they are almost done shopping in Shibuya, Jiang Hai is almost done eating. Then let's go to the izakaya in Shinjuku. Seeing that Jiang Hai is almost done eating, Prawalton also said with a smile, "Oh, let's go." After stuffing the last fried prawn into his mouth, Jiang Hai also nodded. Then the 4 people returned to their car and drove directly to Yodo's famous red light district. But when they approached here, their car was stopped by the police. Looking at the police who stopped the car, Jiang Hai and Prawalton couldn't help but frown. The police here knocked on the window and motioned Prawalton to lower the window. In other people's territory, Prawalton can't go against them, so he lowered the window and looked at the police standing beside him with some doubts to see what they are going to do. Chapter 988. Miss, hello, to enter the Shinjuku district, please accept the inspection. The window was pressed down, and the police outside were not as bad as imagined. Instead, one of them was full of smiles and politely said to Prawalton, "Go and talk to my people." Hearing his words, Prawalton didn't care and pressed the window again. At this time, a man in a black suit came over first. After negotiating with the police, he let Jiang Hai and the others enter. The man also walked to Prawalton's car and explained very politely. Recently, tourists often complain that the security in Shinjuku is not very good. In addition, the recent political situation is more sensitive, so the police will also set up a checkpoint here to check all the vehicles that want to enter this area to ensure the safety of the area. Looking at Jiang Hai and the others, the man said very indifferently. Then Prawalton nodded and went to the back car. Then Jiang Hai and the others drove directly into this area, but no one dared to check them. After Jiang Hai and the others drove in, they saw a lot of izakaya. Izakaya was not a brothel. If one were to describe it, it was somewhat similar to the food stalls in China. It cooked delicious food and let the men and women who had worked for a day boast here. In fact, it was not very messy inside. Everyone had their own compartment, so there were few people who made trouble. Basically, they were open all night. Of course, if they drank too much, it was not necessarily so. But Jiang Hai and the others said that they came to the izakaya but not here. Their goal was actually Kabukicho. There was a special Kabukicho location in Shinjuku. It was a street called Kabukicho Street. Jiang Hai's car was parked here, but before going in, Prawalton deliberately waited for her bodyguards to arrive, then she walked in with Jiang Hai. The flashing red lights in every country were the same, a bit messy. Walking into Kabukicho Street, Jiang Hai found that this place was really bold. As soon as he walked in, he saw a lot of advertisements that made people's hormones burst out. For example, 40 minutes, 8,000 pills and so on, and 24 hours. But at this time, the man who helped Jiang Hai and the others to avoid the police inspection came over. "Let me be your guide for the rest of the road." This person was a white man who looked to be about 30 years old. He looked at Prawalton and Jiang Hai and said with a serious face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai glanced at Prawalton. When he saw Prawalton nod, Jiang Hai also nodded. It seemed that this person should be a local tyrant here. First, don't look at these first things first. To be honest, these are all fake. They are all little girls who accompany you to chat. The Love Plus over there should be the most that kind of shop, that is, a little girl will come over and give you a bath. It's the kind of shop that is only responsible for taking off and not landing. If you want to land, you have to talk to them in private. The price is not something that ordinary people can compare to. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, this person also began to introduce the nearby situation. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. There was such a thing? It seems that the Japanese are really treacherous. If ordinary tourists want to find the kind of people in shops that do that kind of thing, they have to look for the shop in front of us, which means that it's free. They are the head of the chicken here, but of course they don't want to be completely free, because it's very likely that they will find some antes for those tourists. If you want to play here, you have to find those very simple shops that have nothing to do with that kind of thing, such as a strawberry jam shop, a Shinjuku ice cream shop, and so on. At the same time, you also have to look at what they write outside. If it's pure Japanese, then it's not for foreigners, only for Japanese and English. Seeing that Jiang Hai understood, everyone continued to talk as they walked. At the same time, Prawalton's bodyguards also blocked the guys who wanted to come over to solicit customers. You are very familiar with this place. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him meaningfully. I'm a staff member of Walmart in Japan, so I've been here a few times with clients. Alright, let's not go any further. If we go any further, we will enter the territory of the male prostitutes. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man here smiled a little awkwardly. Then, when he saw a movie theater behind a dinosaur in the distance, he immediately changed the topic. Hearing his words, Prawalton and Jiang Hai also looked there. The two of them were not interested in men, so naturally they would not go there. But Jiang Hai also took a look from afar. Basically, the signs there were some non-mainstream punk and so on. Their hair was more colorful than the other. There was no other way this was popular in Japan and South Korea. It was really hard to imagine that some little girls in China liked this kind of thing. Anyway, in Jiang Hai's eyes, it was quite disgusting. Mr. Jiang, do you want to look for service here? After looking around briefly, the man here asked Jiang Hai and Prawalton. He also heard some of Miss Prawalton's hobbies, but usually Prawalton was very reliable. She would not show her hobbies in front of her subordinates. It was precisely because of Jiang Hai that she found a sly guy to accompany Jiang Hai. But accompanying her man to such a place was really exciting. Looking at the man, although Jiang Hai was not very interested in these kinds of services, he still asked, "Do you have any idea?" Here there are cheap and expensive services. For example, half a set of services is basically done by hand and you can't do that. The pink salon over there is the cheapest, and the time is the shortest, about 6,000 yen. The Vision Club over there is also half a set of services, but it can be combined with the temptation of uniforms, and the price is between 10,000 and 12,000 yen. The Vision Club over there is about the same level, but it's slightly more expensive, 15,000 to 20,000 yen. The hotel pays for the cost of a night's stay, which is between 20,000 and 40,000 yen. The quality of the girls in the bubble bath is pretty good, but it's divided into high, and low grades, and the price ranges from 30,000 to 100,000 yen. The quality of the girls in the bubble bath is very high, but it's only half a set, and the price is between 40,000 and 70,000 yen. The girls in the high-end date are basically models and university students, and the price is between 80,000 and 150,000 yen. The highest grade is the hot spring date, where they will send you to a nearby hot spring for a day, and the price is basically about 400,000 yen. There are also some agencies here that specialize in booking AWA actresses and some female celebrities, and the price is between 300,000 and 800,000 yen. If Mr. Jiang needs it, I can contact them at any time. Oh right, everything in the shop is not allowed as it's illegal. In Japan there are clear rules that forbid it, so if you want to do it you can only go to a hotel. Also, at this time the kabukicho basically only executes the customers recommended by regular customers and regular customers. Ordinary strangers will also be rejected. Looking at Jiang Hai, this person started to talk non-stop. It seems like he really wasn't an ordinary old driver. You can't do that. It's so boring. Let's go back. Since we can make an appointment, it's the same if we go back. Hearing this person's introduction, Jiang Hai didn't speak, but Pra Walton on the other side spoke up. She saw very clearly that even men couldn't do that, let alone women, so it was better to go back and play than to do that. Well okay, let's go back. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai didn't say much, although he still wanted to see more here. He didn't come here for that, so he walked out first. Hey, didn't you just say that we can make an appointment with our actresses and female stars? Do you have any photos or something to show me? But Jiang Hai left, but Prawalton pulled the man and said with interest. Hearing Prawalton's words, the man was a little confused, because he didn't know what was wrong with Prawalton. He thought that he flattered her too much. He was a little embarrassed for a while. It was all his fault. How could he say those words so easily? Don't talk nonsense, show me. Seeing that the man's face was not right, Prawalton didn't care. Sometimes it was interesting to scare these men, not to mention that she was now very interested in these AWA actresses. Well okay, I'm only familiar with this Idea Pocket company. Hearing Prawalton's urging, the man had no other choice but to bow, then took out his mobile phone and quickly entered a website. Some girls' photos appeared on the mobile phone. Is it okay? Are the photos reliable? Looking at the mobile phone in her hand, even Prawalton knew that the makeup skills of Japanese girls were very magical, so Prawalton was a little uncertain. These are all quite reliable. After thinking about it, the man whispered. And then this one called Yukitina, this one called Amami Hai, this one called Ai Haneda, is this Nishiki Jessica a mixed blood? Including her and this Himi Mizuko, let's start with these 5 people. Tell them to wait for us in the room. Hearing the words of the man, Prawalton casually nodded and found a few pleasing to the eye. Chapter 989. When Jiang Hai and Prawalton returned to the hotel, the people there had already called the company. For people who could please the Walmart group, the company spared no effort, not to mention the people from the head office. So in less than half an hour, the 5 girls selected by Prawalton had already arrived from various places. They took a shower, put on makeup, changed their clothes and came to Prawalton's room. At this time Jiang Hai and the others were still on the road. It was not that Prawalton did not want to drive fast, but it was because he could not drive fast. He had to admit that the traffic in Dongjing was more congested than in the capital. Although it was already midnight, the cars on the road were still very slow, stopping from time to time. At about 10:30 in the evening, Jiang Hai and the others returned home. But as soon as they entered the house, Azalina and Wallace Shelley looked at each other, then asked Jiang Hai and Prawalton to wait for a while. Then they walked in and opened the door of Prawalton's room while holding a gun in one hand. As soon as the door opened, they saw 5 girls in bathrobes chatting. When they saw the door suddenly open, the 5 girls immediately knelt down and greeted the people outside. Well, don't scare them. I asked them to come over. Let's learn together. Looking at the 5 teachers here, Prawalton, who was a little nervous at first, laughed and then said to Azalina and the others, "There are outsiders. We will sleep here." If it was just Jiang Hai and Prawalton or even Prawalton's girls, Azalina and the others would not care, but now that there were outsiders they had to care. Seeing that Azalina and Wallace Shelley were ready to stay, Prawalton also smiled and then pushed Jiang Hai in. Your mission today is to serve this person well. Of course you'll have to teach us your unique skills. Prawalton looked at the 5 teachers in front of him and said with a smile. After hearing Prawalton's words, the 5 teachers nodded shyly and took the initiative to stand up and walk to Jiang Hai. Meanwhile, Jiang Hai was already in a daze. Among the teachers in front of him, 3 of them were very familiar to him and 2 of them looked familiar. Tina Yumiju, whose stage name was Rio. Jiang Hai knew a lot of her educational videos such as the Newlyweds, campus beauty pageants and so on. Although the license plate number couldn't be announced here, he knew a lot of her educational videos. As for that Tian Hai, some people said that her cough, the parts that shouldn't be described were fake, and that her acting was a bit exaggerated, but wasn't she beautiful? Jiang Hai's computer still had the video she made in school. That Zazaki Jessica, Jiang Hai knew that she had a lot of videos such as Racing Queen, Newcomer Beauty and so on. Of course, Jiang Hai himself had never seen it. No matter if others believed it or not, he believed it anyway. As for the other two teachers, although Jiang Hai didn't know their names, he was familiar with them. Now that he saw them in person, although Jiang Hai just said that he wasn't interested in them, the dragon balls in his body were ready to move at this time. We will teach you some skills in this regard and the reaction of a man, so that you can be more comfortable and harmonious in your future life. The 5 teachers came in front of Jiang Hai and helped Jiang Hai take off his clothes. Sasaki Jessica, who was a quarter Italian, also modestly said to the 3 women beside her. Hearing her words, Azalina was a little embarrassed, Wallace Shelley was ready to take note, and Prawalton was watching the situation here without blinking. Soon they took off Jiang Hai's clothes and they also took off their bathrobes. At this time they were also wearing some more sexy clothes inside. Of course, they didn't cover the places that should be covered. Then the teachers knelt in front of Jiang Hai and began the pre-battle preparations that shouldn't be described. The indescribable swallowing and spitting is also a skill. The most indescribable point is where he can't be described, and when he's teasing he can't keep attacking there. Looking at Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley in front of her, Sasaki Jessica, who was the best at English, let the others demonstrate. She also took over from time to time and explained to them at the same time. Originally, Jiang Hai had always been very strong in this regard. After all, his physical fitness was there, but this time he couldn't hold on for 15 minutes. After a while, when the battle started, how to use his waist and legs. Not only could his legs clamp Jiang Hai's waist, but he could also put them on his shoulders. He could also use his toes to brush his hair. There was also the coordination of other support personnel. How to attack, how to maximize the battle, which angle was the most comfortable, which angle was the best, which angle was the wrong one. Looking at the 5 teachers in front of her teaching one by one, Azalina was a little embarrassed at first, but later she also watched. As for Prawalton, he had already taken off his clothes and was touching himself while watching the battle in front of him. Usually when Jiang Hai fought against 5 people he could still fight fiercely. But in front of these professional teachers, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed. In the past, the time was shortened quickly, and he couldn't hold on for more than 20 minutes. But in the eyes of these teachers, it was already amazing. One must know that ordinary people might not even be able to hold on for more than 10 minutes, and all the actors had to take drugs. But they were still straight, which was convenient for filming. And most importantly, the person had to be replaced. Unlike Jiang Hai, there was no problem at all in this scene. Tawana even smiled and asked Jiang Hai if he wanted to be a male actor. It must be a very powerful existence. While Jiang Hai and his women were studying here, on the other side of the Akita mansion, Nakamura, who Jiang Hai met today, was led into the mansion by someone. When he came to the main house, he saw an old man sitting at the head of the table. Nakamura Masa greets President Akita. Seeing the old man, Nakamura Masa took a few steps forward and bowed, then he just stood there and looked at the old man who was drinking tea in front of him. He didn't intend to sit down and talk about the old days. Masa, you don't have to be so polite. We are old acquaintances. How is your father? Looking at Nakamura Masa in front of him, the old man surnamed Akita put down the tea in his hand and said to Nakamura Masa with a smile. Thanks to you he's fine, but it's already very late today, so my father went back to rest. If there's anything you can tell me. Looking at President Akita, Nakamura Masa just smiled, then said seriously. Good, you really have the shadow of your father. What I want to tell you, you should know, right? How about it? Are you ready to help me? Looking at Nakamura Masa, President Akita smiled, then said with a golden light in his eyes. Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. But unfortunately, Nakamura Masa ignored him. You don't understand? Alright, I'll be frank. I want you to help me deal with Jiang Hai. Seeing that Nakamura Masa didn't agree, President Akita frowned, then said seriously. But hearing his words, Nakamura Masa turned around and was about to leave. What? We haven't talked about the conditions yet? You rejected it? Are you and your father so willing to be the dogs of the Americans? Looking at Nakamura Masa's uncooperative look, President Akita's eyes narrowed, and killing intent surged. We are businessmen, we won't do things that don't benefit us. Moreover, even if my father and I are dogs, we will choose a good master. Compared to you, to be honest, whether it's strength, magnanimity, or power, you are far inferior. Hearing President Akita's words, Nakamura Masa said with disdain. The Japanese are like this, when you're not as strong as them, you can reason with them, but they won't reason with you. They will tell you that the fist is the reason, but when your fist is bigger than them and after beating them they won't talk about the law with you. They still think that the fist is the reason. Comparing the Akita family and the Walton family is like the difference between an ant and an elephant. Nakamura Masa was ambitious, but he wasn't stupid. If he really followed them to deal with Jiang Hai, it's not a big deal whether they can deal with him or not, but after that the Walton family's revenge will destroy his family. Under the premise that it has nothing to do with politics, he naturally made a choice. If Jiang Hai is fine, then they will still be the representatives of the Walton family. If something happens to Jiang Hai, they will be dead. What should he choose? Is there a need to say it? So the moment President Akita opened his mouth, he had already made his decision. These bastards without national integrity, idiots, shit. Looking at Nakamura Masa walking out, President Akita didn't dare to kill him at this time, so he had no other choice but to curse. But he was not willing to let Jiang Hai go just like that. Chapter 990. Hiss, phew, my leg. The next morning when Jiang Hai walked out of the room, his feet were floating. It was because what he felt last night was not something to be told to outsiders. The 5 professional teachers were indeed professionals. After teaching the students, they personally guided the 3 students and the teaching equipment, which was Jiang Hai. After a few close contacts, Jiang Hai felt that their fighting strength had increased, making Jiang Hai speechless. After he woke up this morning, the other girls and teachers also came out. After he came out, the other girls and teachers also came out. After all, the status of the teachers was not high, so after saying goodbye to Jiang Hai and the others, they left. Of course, when they left, each of them received a check of $100,000 from Jiang Hai. $1 was equal to 115 yen, and $100,000 was equal to 11,500,000 yen. According to the person yesterday, the appearance fee of an ordinary actress was between 300,000 to 800,000 yen, and these top actresses were around 1,000,000 yen, which was about 60,000 yen. Now that Jiang Hai directly gave them tens of millions of yen, these teachers couldn't help but be grateful. At the same time, they also thought in their hearts that this was Jiang Hai's recognition of their teaching last night, and at the same time they were also very touched. On the other side, Hitsaki Jessica also asked Jiang Hai if they needed to come over to teach tonight. They didn't need to charge tonight. After all, tens of millions of yen was indeed a lot of money in Japan. However, Jiang Hai waved his hand, indicating that they didn't need to come. It wasn't that he was uncomfortable last night, but that he was too comfortable. However, if he continued to be so comfortable, Jiang Hai's body might not be able to withstand it. After all, he could no longer withstand 1 drop of that 10 drops of blood. After these teachers left, Jiang Hai and the others also went to eat breakfast. Japan's breakfast was actually very simple. In the past, the Western world used artillery to blast open Japan's trade gate, so Japan's acceptance of some Western food was extremely high. For example, in China, although some people drink coffee and eat sandwiches in the morning, more families still eat big fruit, fried dough sticks, drink tofu pudding, eat ramen, wonton, and so on. This was the eating habits of Huaxia. The eating habits of Japan were more similar to those of the West. It was indeed because they didn't have time to eat breakfast according to the Chinese or Japanese style. The pace of life here was too fast. In order to sleep a little longer, in order to not squeeze so many people on the tram, the breakfast of ordinary office workers was Western, sandwiches, and coffee. If they lived with their parents, they might have some rice balls or something, that was it. After Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the hotel's buffet restaurant, they basically saw Western food. Of course, there were rice balls, sushi, and so on. Among these things, Jiang Hai's favorite was something called potato pancake. This thing was made of potatoes, slices of ham, a bowl of beans, and eggs. It was like a pancake. The eggs were wrapped in these things and then there was ketchup on the side. This was casually placed. Foreigners, especially Europeans and Americans, liked to eat ketchup very much. However, Japan continued to have the taste of Huaxia, so their acceptance of this thing was just okay. After eating breakfast, Jiang Hai and the others casually went out to play. Since they had come to Tokyo, it was impossible for them not to go out at all. So they went to Tokyo Tower, Clear Sky Tower, or something like that. Anyway, it was just some landmark buildings. At noon, they went to eat a very famous ramen called Eating Noodle House. This noodle house had a total of 3 kinds of ramen, dienmian ramen, and buckwheat noodles. The soup was also divided into thick fish noodles and aromatic noodles. According to the internet, their soup didn't use pork bones at all, so the taste was a little different from ordinary ramen. Therefore, the king of ramen, there was no pufferbone ramen here, but the other ramen tasted quite good. Jiang Hai ate their signature barbecued pork and thick fish noodles. He had to admit that the taste was really good. In Japan, ramen was actually a dish, not noodles. Many people ate ramen with rice. Jiang Hai couldn't stand it, so he ate 2 bowls of ramen and didn't order any rice or noodles to go with it. After eating ramen, Jiang Hai and the others went out to play again in the afternoon. In the evening, the father and son from Nakamura came again. They didn't see them today because they were arranging the promotion in Tsukiji Market. As far as the current situation was concerned, the effect was quite good. Of course, the dinner was also arranged by them, but they didn't eat any women's soup. This was because they also learned that Jiang Hai didn't eat raw food. That was why they specially called a teppanyaki chef to make teppanyaki for Jiang Hai and the others tonight. When it came to teppanyaki, many people would think that this thing was from Japan. In fact, this method of eating was first invented by the Spanish. It was a poor way of eating. Later, it was spread to the United States and Mexico. In other words, this method of eating was actually mastered by the Americans earlier than the Japanese, but it was the Japanese who carried it forward. Now, when it came to teppanyaki, people only knew about Japan but not Spain and the United States. However, he had to admit that the master in Japan was quite skilled. Teppanyaki could be used to make almost anything such as fish, shrimp, scallops, vegetables, beef and so on. It could be used to make fried rice, fried noodles, etc. Jiang Hai also liked this method of eating, but usually at home, Chia didn't have the cooking skills to feed nearly 20 people, so Jiang Hai couldn't eat it at home, but here he didn't care. After dinner, Jiang Hai was quite satisfied, then he went back to rest. In the next 2 days, Jiang Hai and Prawalton went out to play during the day and tried new tricks in the hotel at night. Unknowingly, it was already the day of the fish auction. The place where Jiang Hai auctioned the fish was Tsukiji Market. Perhaps many people who had read foreign farming novels would be familiar with Tsukiji Market. This was the largest fish market in Japan, and the second largest farmers' market. It was opened in 1935. Jiang Hai didn't need to memorize anything here, after all, he could find it on the internet. For example, the information about Kabukicho Street was not easy to find on the internet, so Jiang Hai went to popularize it. Tsukiji Market was originally the largest fish market, but now it was the largest fish market as well as the largest tourist market. The shops in the market were clearly separated, some were doing wholesale and some were doing retail. Just like how some shops in the street didn't do business with foreigners, most of the shops here didn't do business with foreigners. In this world, Japan and South Korea were definitely on the top of the list when it came to the self-esteem of a nation. In a small place, they had to add the word big in front of their own ethnic group and country to show that they were different. But compared to South Korea, which was called the Republic of Korea in their bones, in fact they quite admired the life abroad, Japan was more united. After all, in South Korea, imported cars and foreign tourists were all important resources. But in Japan, to be honest, there were very few people who drove imported cars. Except for some famous cars, Japan's local cars accounted for a large proportion. At the same time, the tourist areas here were also like this. They often didn't do business with foreigners. For foreigners to come to visit, their attitude was also to come. This was also related to the economic environment. Although Japan was not pleasing to the eye, it was the world's second largest economy before the rise of Huaxia. Now that Huaxia had risen, it was also the third. In the afternoon of the day of the fish auction, Jiang Hai and Prawalton drove a motorcade to Tsukiji Market. This was the first time Jiang Hai came to Tsukiji Market. After arriving, he found that this market was really arrogant. There was a sign outside the market, which wrote the market's break time. Every Sunday the whole market was not open. Every morning there were 2 irregular breaks every month. At the end of the year there were 3 consecutive breaks. Foreign vehicles must be registered, otherwise they were not allowed to enter. Taxis were not allowed to enter and so on. According to Prawalton, she had been here several times. There was not even a parking lot nearby. If they didn't build a Walmart nearby, their car would not have a place to park. Regarding this, Jiang Hai could only chuckle. He couldn't say anything else. It seems that the Japanese are indeed very xenophobic. The car drove into the nearby Walmart. Jiang Hai and the others went to the venue first. As soon as they entered, Jiang Hai saw that his huge Atlantic bluefin tuna had been placed on the exhibition table in the venue. There were ice cubes below to keep it fresh. After looking around, Jiang Hai didn't have anything to look at, so he was ready to go to Tsukiji Market. Prawalton sent 4 bodyguards to secretly follow, and Jiang Hai also took Azalina and Wallace Shelley. A group of 7 people came to Tsukiji Market below. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai smelled a fishy smell. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had long been accustomed to this smell. Walking into the market, Jiang Hai also had to nod. Tsukiji market was indeed a big market. It could be said that Japan did not prohibit the killing of certain kinds of fish, so in Japan's market, all kinds of marine animals could be seen, including whales, sharks, dolphins, and other things. Of course, these things were dead. Chapter 991. Jiang Hai looked around and was surprised and satisfied with Tsukiji market. This was because he could find all the fishes in the Pacific Ocean and even the Arctic Ocean. That's right. As long as you are patient, you will be able to find all the fishes in the Pacific Ocean. Almost all kinds of fish can be found here, from big sharks, whales to small bream eels and even some migratory fish. Speaking of salmon, Jiang Hai is very familiar with it. There were a lot of salmon in Bing City. The border between Huaxia and Russia was the Longjiang River. Half of the river belonged to Huaxia, and the other half belonged to Russia. Salmon was one of the fishes in this river. But those who had stayed in Heilongjiang province knew that although half of the river belonged to Huaxia, and the other half belonged to Russia, only Huaxia would fish in the river. The Far East region of Russia was vast and sparsely populated. They do not like to eat seafood. In places like Poseidon, those spider crabs and king crabs cost a few hundred RMB per catty in China and 100 renminbi per catty there. Each crab weighed at least 10 catties. This was the difference between Arctic ginseng, Arctic ice prawns, sea urchins, abalones, etc. You can put on a pair of swimming goggles and eat them for free. This was how the Russians viewed the environment. Of course, in recent years they knew how to fish for these things and sell them to Huaxia. Actually, the average income of the Russians was very low, especially in the Far East region. Huaxia's wine, food, and light industrial products were all for fun. The Far East region of Russia had a total area of 6.2 million square kilometers, and the population was less than 7 million. Other than some cities, it was really a no-man's land. One person had an average of 1 square kilometer of land. Who were you trying to reason with? It was because the Russians did not fish that there were very few people in Huaxia, but there were a lot of fishes in Russia. Therefore, in the past few years, there would often be some Huaxia fishermen who would take advantage of the night to fish for fish. However, this was considered an invasion of the other party's territory. The other party's soldiers had to shoot, so many fishermen died at the border. And these fishermen exchanged their lives for these salmon. When these salmon arrived in Huaxia, it depended on how you sold them. If you sold them as salmon, then you made a profit. After all, these salmon were pure wild. It was no problem to fool laymen. But if you sold them as salmon, then they weren't worth much. However, there was an exception, and that was the salmon roe. In China, the caviar made from salmon roe was quite popular. However, except for some countries in Asia, other Western countries wouldn't eat salmon roe. Here we have to talk about another specialty of Soviet Russia, black caviar. Speaking of caviar, perhaps everyone knew a little about it, but to be honest, they didn't know much about it. Including Jiang Hai. He didn't know much about it before, and he wasn't very clear about it now because his family didn't breed these things. But when he was at the auction, he saw 10 kilograms of black caviar priced at $50,000. He was a little surprised. Nakamura, who knew that Jiang Hai was a VIP, also introduced the black caviar to Jiang Hai. In fact, most people called caviar caviar. In fact, this was wrong. Only the caviar of 3 kinds of fish could be made into caviar. They were the beluga paddlefish, the osietra paddlefish, and the sevruga paddlefish. Only the caviar of these 3 kinds of paddlefish was called caviar. The others, including the Chinese paddlefish's caviar, weren't called caviar caviar. It had nothing to do with preciousness, value, or size. Only these 3 kinds of caviar were the best. Caviar was sold for $860 per kilogram in Soviet Russia. In London, the best caviar was sold for $5,000 per kilogram. It was precisely because of this that many places in Europe raised paddlefish. However, the more troublesome thing about raising paddlefish was that once the caviar was taken out, the fish would die. Moreover, paddlefish grew very slowly. It would take at least 4 or 5 years to harvest. It was precisely because of this that raising paddlefish in China wasn't very good. First, it was because it couldn't be sold at a high price. In the eyes of the people in China, caviar could be made into caviar. This was simply a difference in perception because people in China weren't so keen on eating caviar. For example, foie gras was the best in Europe, but there weren't many people eating it in China. There was no market, so naturally, it couldn't be sold at a high price. Second, because the growth cycle was too long, not many people had the patience to spend 5 or 6 years to raise paddlefish. This was really not worth it. Third, it was really troublesome to take out the caviar. There was no such organization in China. In order to extract the sturgeon's eggs, the sturgeon had to be knocked out first, but it couldn't be killed because if the mother died, the eggs would be finished. Then the fish roe was quickly taken out, screened, washed and filtered, and handed to an appraiser to identify its grade. Then the size, color, fullness, density and smell of the fish roe were evaluated. Finally, salt was added and the fish roe was marinated into fish roe sauce. This was also the most demanding of craftsmanship. The salt could not be too much or too little. The taste of the salt could not overpower the original taste, but the fish roe must have a slight taste of salt to form a subtle combination. After the salt was added, the fish roe had to be shaken on a strainer until the skin of the fish roe was dehydrated. Every grain had to be separated, which meant that they were dried. Then they were canned and shipped all over the world. All these steps only took 15 minutes, which meant that they had to be done within 15 minutes. Otherwise the caviar would be ruined. It was precisely because of this strict system that the caviar was so expensive. In fact, the main issue was a matter of values. For example, Jiang Hai's beef. Someone had said that Jiang Hai's thoughts were not right. Why should he sell good things overseas and not to his own people? Good beef was sold overseas and good fish was also sold in China. Jiang Hai's thoughts were not right. He was kneeling down and licking the feet of foreigners. He was wrong. But generally, Jiang Hai did not even bother with people who said such things. The simplest question was, Jiang Hai's beef was sold in China. Who would buy it? For example, the housewives went to the supermarket. It didn't matter which city it was, whether it was in the Northeast, Beijing, or Shanghai. It didn't matter where it was. They went to Walmart and saw Jiang Hai's beef at Sam's Club. It was 2,400 renminbi per catty. Would you buy it? Other people's salmon was sold for more than 30 renminbi per catty, but Jiang Hai's was sold for 300 renminbi per catty. Would you buy it? This was not including the shipping fees and customs duties. Anyone who had thoughts would say, why should I buy it? The best beef in China was selling cucumber strips for 40 renminbi, but Jiang Hai's beef was sold for 2,400 renminbi. A normal white-collar worker's monthly salary was not enough to buy 2 catties of meat. It was simply unrealistic. The concept of consumption in the country had not improved. If you told them how delicious the beef was, they would not listen. This was because to them the beef was the same. The only difference was the fat, lean and location. The selling price was also different. In fact, this was also the case. What was the difference between Wagyu's beef and ordinary beef? The nutrition was the same and it was easy to eat. But Wagyu's beef and fish were sold at a high price. Jiang Hai's beef and fish were also sold at a high price. These were not for ordinary people. Only a few rich people in China knew about these things. That was why Wagyu could only sell his beef overseas. Thinking about the huge imperial capital, Jiang Hai and Qi Li's 4 stores had already taken all the consumer groups. How many people were there in the entire imperial capital? Jiang Hai wanted to sell his beef overseas, but no one would buy it. Hey, what are you thinking about? Are you in a daze? Just when Jiang Hai was sighing with emotion in his heart, Azalina could not help but gently pat Jiang Hai's shoulder and whisper. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also reacted. Oh, nothing. I was just in a daze for a while. Jiang Hai smiled. He could not say that he was thinking so much unintentionally, so he could only smile and say to Azalina. Some things were better left in his heart. If there is nothing else, I think we should go back. I feel that someone is watching us. Hearing Azalina's words, Jiang Hai also looked around. Sure enough, when he looked at them, many people immediately looked away and pretended to buy things. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai smiled. He did not know who these people were, but he was sure that these people definitely did not have good intentions, so he slowly walked towards the Walmart. The 4 Prawalton bodyguards who were originally scattered around, also walked to Jiang Hai's side under Azalina's command. With the help of the crowd around him, Jiang Hai and the others quickly walked into the Walmart. After entering, they were relieved. At this time, the people outside also dispersed and pretended to walk around, but their eyes looked at Jiang Hai from time to time. Looking at their eyes, Jiang Hai also smiled. It would be strange if he was not stared at. You're done. Just in time, almost everyone is here. It will start in a while. Seeing Jiang Hai coming back, Prawalton was almost done with his work, then he smiled and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also looked around. When he left, there was no one except the staff, but when he came back, there were almost 20 or 30 strangers in the room. Basically, they were all Japanese. They gathered in 2s and 3s and chatted. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai could not help but smile. These guys are all his customers. Almost everyone is here. I don't think anyone will come. Are you ready to start? At this time, Nakamura walked to the side of Jiang Hai and Prawalton and asked Prawalton, "Let's start at the scheduled time." Hearing Nakamura's words, Prawalton also nodded. A good show is about to begin. Chapter 992. Everyone, it's almost time. Please take your seats. Seeing that it was almost time, Nakamura walked to the front of the stage and bowed to the crowd while inviting them to their seats. These people were also here for the big fish. Naturally, they wouldn't be rash and went to sit down. Jiang Hai and Prawalton sat in the distance, watching the situation of these people. They naturally wouldn't drive up the price, but it was still necessary to come and watch. Soon the auction began under the auspices of Nakamura. It wasn't the first time Jiang Hai participated in this thing, so he naturally didn't care very much. He just sat there and watched. This time the auction was basically some marine products such as the 10 kilograms of blackfish roe just now. In addition, there were some other tunas, yellowfin and bluefin. These were all collected by Prawalton. Then there were some huge crabs, lobsters and the like. Of course, each of them had to be more than 40 kilograms in size. Otherwise there was no need to auction them. After all, the lobsters in Jiang Hai's manor were more than 30 kilograms in size. The speed of the auction was very fast. In less than an hour, most of the items had been sold. 90% of the items had found their owners. Only the malu fish was sold. Although this fish was very big, the price was obviously a bit high. After all, this was not a very rare fish. Other than that, the other items had been sold. Next, we will proceed to the last item of the auction, which is this bluefin tuna. Here is the fish's information. Length, weight, meat quality is rated S grade. Although it's not the spring auction, we all know why this thing exists. Next, let's begin the auction of this tuna. The starting price is $600,000, and each bid must not be less than $50,000. Begin. As soon as Nakamura finished speaking, an old man raised his hand. 1 million. After the old man raised his hand, he slowly shouted a number. Of course, this record-breaking tuna was not only worth this price. The old man did this to tell those small businesses that this fish was not something they could covet. This is Ono Toshio, the oldest 3-star Michelin chef in the world, the son of Ono Jiro. He is also the president of the current 3-star Michelin restaurant, Sukiya Hashiro. Seeing this man raise his hand, Prawalton also introduced him to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai has heard of this person before. The legendary god of sushi, but Jiang Hai himself doesn't eat raw and most of the sushi is raw. Jiang Hai doesn't like vegetarians, so he is not interested in this restaurant. $2 million. At this time, a middle-aged man with glasses raised his hand. This is the person in charge of Kanda cuisine. Looking at the middle-aged man, Prawalton also said to Jiang Hai, "Kanda?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also glanced at her. What's the situation with this Kanda? Kanda is also a 3-star Michelin restaurant. There are a total of 13 3-star Michelin restaurants in Tokyo, so Michelin also rated Tokyo as the city of gourmet. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton introduced with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. The rating of Chinese and foreigners are still different. 5 million. At this time, a foreigner raised his hand and said to the person next to him with a smile. This is the executive chef of Quintessence, which is also a 3-star Michelin restaurant, but he is a chef. Seeing this person, Prawalton also introduced him, but Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why is a chef snatching the tuna? Is he just here to raise the price? In fact, this is indeed the case. He only called it once and he didn't call it again. Then Saitu Sushi Restaurant bid 7 million, and Sagaya Sushi Restaurant bid 85 million, and then the price increase gradually dropped. After all, although this fish is definitely worth more than $2 million, who doesn't want to spend less money to buy it? However, although the price increase is not so scary, the speed of the price increase has not stopped, and it slowly increased to 2 million. Why are all the people who buy this fish from sushi restaurants? Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai asked Prawalton with some doubts. Then Prawalton also introduced the situation of Japanese cuisine to Jiang Hai. In China, if there is any shop that makes money, it must be the seafood restaurant, but it is different in Japan. This was because the most profitable restaurant in Japan was the sushi restaurant. It was because the people in Japan really liked eating sushi. And sushi mainly depends on the craftsmanship, followed by the materials. Their biggest requirement is the freshness of the materials. How much can rice be worth? How much can kelp be worth? The most expensive thing is the small piece of fish on top. If you went to those famous sushi restaurants to eat, 20,000 to 30,000 yen per person would be like playing around, and this was under the condition that you didn't order anything expensive and just wanted to eat until you were full. Under such circumstances, you may not be able to arrange a meal in these restaurants half a month later. Besides, no one would be so stingy when it came to eating sushi in these restaurants. 50,000 yen per person wasn't that expensive. Serving 200 people a day would cost 10 million yen, which was nearly $100,000. That would be 3 million in a month's income. This is assuming that you don't eat anything too expensive such as this tuna. This tuna is worth tens of thousands of yen, not to mention the meat on the cheeks, just the belly and the middle belly. Even if they buy this fish for $3 million, they can definitely earn it back. Just as the sushi restaurants over there were increasing the price by 10,000 or 20,000, suddenly a voice sounded. 75 million. As the voice sounded, everyone looked at the source of the voice. At that time, many sushi restaurants sighed. They knew that they couldn't compete this time. The person they looked at was a man in his early 60s. This man has a square face. At this time, he was looking at the fish on the stage with a smile, as if this fish is in his pocket. This man is Kiyoshi Kimura, and he is the most likely person to buy our fish this time. Looking at this man, Prawalton introduced him to Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai was also looking at this man, but Jiang Hai felt that this man doesn't seem to be a chef. He is indeed not a chef, he is a chairman. When he was young, he set up the Haidai Village Company, but Haidai Village is just a company. This company mainly has two brands, one is Haidai Sushi, and the other is Samadhi Sushi. Although these two sushi are not rated in Michelin, they are the two most popular sushi restaurants in Japan. Among them, Samadhi Sushi is open 24 hours a day, and the income in Japan is quite considerable. It is precisely because of this that these sushi restaurants can't compete with this real entrepreneur. Hearing Prawalton mention Haidai Village, Jiang Hai nodded. He also knew about Haidai Village. He used to look up information about bluefin tuna in China, and there was also an introduction of this company. Basically, the Fish King was finally won by this company, and it was indeed very strong. Seeing this man join the competition, 90% of the sushi restaurants gave up. In the end, the Saito family, who was also very rich, added another $20,000, making it $77 million, but then it was overshadowed by Kiyoshi Kimura's $85 million. When this price appeared, it meant that the auction was over. The original price of this fish was about $7 million, and now it was sold for $150,000 more, which was good news. The moment Nakamura dropped the hammer, this newly recorded fish belonged to Kiyoshi Kimura of Haidai Village. He also stood up and accepted the congratulations of the people in the sushi shops around him. His Samadhi Sushi mainly sells tuna, which is tuna, so he is determined to get this thing. With the end of the auction, everyone left one by one. At this time, Nakamura came to Jiang Hai and Prawalton, smiling as he reported the results of the auction to them. The main purpose of the auction was not to sell these fish, but to promote Walmart. At the same time, it was to tell the sushi restaurants that Walmart would be selling high-end seafood in the future. In Japan, regulars were very important. Japan was a nostalgic country. Compared to China or the US, quality was the most important factor. The quality of the people here was one thing, but more importantly, they were nostalgic. For example, if a person always went to a convenience store near his home to buy things, even if the things in the convenience store were more expensive than other places, as long as the things were similar, he would always come back to buy things. The same is true for these sushi restaurants. They all have familiar suppliers. If they want them to come and buy fish, they need this auction to let them know the quality of Walmart's fish. To be exact, they need to know the quality of Jiang Hai's fish. Sushi restaurants have extremely strict requirements for quality. Leaving them with such an idea would be even more beneficial for Jiang Hai's seafood to enter the Japanese market. This can be regarded as opening a new market for Jiang Hai's seafood. By the way, the president of Haidai Village, Mr. Kimura, hopes to invite Miss Jiang Hai and Mr. Jiang to dinner. After finishing the business, Nakamura said to Jiang Hai and Prawalton. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai shook his head. Maybe I can't eat this meal and I have to go quickly because those people have been eyeing me. Thinking of the feeling of being stared at in Tsukiji Market just now, Jiang Hai said seriously, and Prawalton heard his words also became serious. Chapter 993. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton's face changed color in an instant. She had told Jiang Hai before she came that she would be responsible for his safety. Now if there was an accident she would be a sinner. Not to mention others, she herself would not forgive herself. So now that Jiang Hai said that they were being watched, she immediately called and sent more bodyguards in a plane, ready to take off at any time. I still have some finishing work here in Japan. After sending you on the plane, I will stay here for a few days. Is it okay for you to go back by yourself? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said seriously. Of course there is no problem. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled. He wanted to go back, it was his business. He couldn't let Prawalton delay his work and send him back. After hearing the words of the two, Nakamura respectfully retreated. He naturally knew who wanted to deal with Jiang Hai, the Akita family, but he didn't say it. He knew that as a dog he couldn't murder his master, but if his master didn't ask him, then he wouldn't say much. So he just respectfully retreated, and then went to tell Kiyoshi Kimura that Jiang Hai had an urgent matter and had to return to the United States soon. This meal could only be arranged next time, but he wanted to buy the contract of high-level fish, which was not a problem. Soon Prawalton's bodyguards were sent, and then Jiang Hai and Prawalton left here together with Azalina and Wallace Shelley and went to the airport. Looking at such a motorcade, the people who were watching outside quickly retreated. Kidding, they knew that these people were not to be trifled with. They would not provoke such bad luck. Although the bounty was good, one had to be alive to spend it. At least from their point of view, it was very inappropriate. Perhaps it was because of the deterrence effect of the large number of people. Jiang Hai and the others didn't encounter any accidents on their way to the Haneda airport, although their speed was very slow. After arriving at the Haneda airport, Jiang Hai and the others boarded the plane that was arranged by Pra Walton. After sending off Jiang Hai, they came back to pick up Pra Walton. As soon as they boarded the plane, the stewardesses looked at Jiang Hai with sparkling eyes. They remembered that he was the only man they could come into contact with during the contract period. Naturally, they were quite interested in Jiang Hai. As the plane took off, Jiang Hai heaved a sigh of relief. To be honest, he did not have a good impression of Japan. The people here looked humble, but they were actually extremely arrogant and xenophobic. At least Jiang Hai didn't like them. But it was estimated that in the future, just like South Korea, he would not be able to come here often. Putting down the unhappiness in his heart, Jiang Hai looked at the 10 stewardesses who reappeared after the plane stabilized. Needless to say, it was another big battle. These 10 hours of flight time would not be wasted. At this time, in the Akita family's mansion, after learning that Jiang Hai had boarded the plane, the Akita family was furious. It had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, and Prawalton was not someone the small Akita family could afford to offend. So Prawalton Jiang Hai didn't have to worry. After about 10 hours of flight, Prawalton's plane landed at the airport in Boston. Jiang Hai, who had already contacted his home through the satellite phone, saw Al-Sala waiting outside the airport with his shield for a long time when he got off the plane. After bidding farewell to the 10 stewardesses who were reluctant to leave, Jiang Hai got in the car and rushed in the direction of his home. After returning to the manor and nestling on the sofa in the living room, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He could finally relax. Chi Jia and the others knew that Jiang Hai was back, so they all rushed back from outside. Don't get me wrong, they didn't go out to play. It was because it was already March and it was time to start planting. Not only were the vegetables and fruits in the greenhouse going to be planted, but the grapes were also going to be planted. Even Jiang Hai's tea trees were almost ready to be harvested. Spring, the recovery of all things, was naturally the busiest season. Everyone in Jiang Hai's manor was very busy. When they came back, their bodies and hair were covered with weeds and mud, but Jiang Hai still hugged each of them and told them that he was back. As for Tajera, she was still in school. After returning home to rest for 2 days, Jiang Hai also joined the pace of spring plowing. But this time there were Chi Jia, Chia, Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yunshan, Azalina, Wallace Shelley, Alessera, and the wives of Jiang Hai's subordinates in the manor, who were also the aunties. They didn't need Jiang Hai's help, because they had already designed the vegetables to be planted this year. Brussels sprouts, radishes, carrots, celery, chives, ginger, eggplants, peppers, cucumbers, zucchini, pumpkins, winter gourds, bitter gourds, peas, broad beans, leeks, onions, daylilies, garlic, and so on. There were a total of 20 or 30 kinds of vegetables. Fortunately, the vegetable field in the greenhouse that Jiang Hai originally opened was big enough. Otherwise, it would really be impossible to plant them. The most important one was tomatoes. This year, Chia was going to make her own tomato sauce. Just this thing alone was nearly 1 mu of land. According to the calculation of the yield of 7,000 kilograms per mu, this was 7 tons of tomatoes, which was enough for the consumption of the people in Jiang Hai's manor. In addition to these vegetables, there were also a lot of fruits, which Jiang Hai had also introduced, so there was no need to say more here. In addition to vegetables and fruits, Jiang Hai also planted a lot of tea trees. Now the tea trees had already sprouted, but Jiang Hai hadn't picked them yet. He was going to pick them at the end of March. As for the vineyard, because it had a good start last year, in March this year, Dulles Gerard pulled Aphrodite and the others over to start planting grapes. Therefore, Aphrodite and the others were now very busy. Needless to say, the cowboys and fishermen were recovering. Animals were also recovering. Edward Anderson and the others were now watching the cows in the manor breeding. After all, there were too many cows in the manor and there was more than one breeding cow. Naturally, the bred cows couldn't be bred again, and they couldn't be allowed to have conflicts. Every cow had to be divided, which was the biggest role of the cows. The fishermen were also very busy because the new fry were sent over. When the fry entered the water, they had to sprinkle a lot of bait every day to let the fry stay in their manor. Jiang Hai didn't even have a purse seine, so naturally he had to use this method. Therefore, when everyone was very busy, there were only 2 idle people left in the manor. One was Jiang Hai and the other was Enchanting Peters. Jiang Hai studied for a while and found that everyone was very busy, so it wasn't good for him to be idle. Therefore he planned to go and plant the grass seeds in the burned pasture, and then go and open up 2 mu of paddy fields. He still had a lot of rice seeds here. Although he hadn't planted them before, he still had to study them. But before that he had to plant the pasture first. The pasture seeds were easy to find. Jiang Hai had already ordered them a long time ago. With just a phone call, all the pasture seeds that could be planted in the wasteland came. Then Jiang Hai soaked the seeds in water. Then, about 1 million of them released spiritual energy. Don't think that this ratio is very high. Jiang Hai's new manor had a total land area of 15,000 mu. 1 mu was equivalent to 6 mu of land, which was 90,000 mu of land. About 200,000 to 3,000 plants would be planted in 1 mu, which was a total of 270 million plants. It would consume 270 strands of spiritual energy from Jiang Hai, and 1 strand of spiritual energy from 1 million grass seeds was already a lot. After consuming the spiritual energy, Jiang Hai and Enchanting Peters wouldn't wait for the grass seeds to germinate before planting them. Instead, after soaking the seeds, they would pull them to the pasture the next day and directly throw them away. Then they would pour the water that contained spiritual energy on the land. Don't think that Jiang Hai's way of doing things would cause the grass to grow badly. In fact, with spiritual energy, it was better to raise them like this. In just one night, these grass seeds would be planted in the ground, take root and slowly grow. According to the calculation of 10 strands of spiritual energy a day, Jiang Hai was very tired these days. Basically, the spiritual energy that he recovered every day was added to these things. It was said that Jiang Hai didn't upgrade because he couldn't make ends meet. For a whole March, Jiang Hai's manor was very busy. Of course, other people were also very busy. For example, Prawalton also returned to the United States a few days ago. She specially came to Jiang Hai's place to stay for 3 days, not only to renew the old friendship with Jiang Hai, but also to tell Jiang Hai about the situation in Japan. Since the end of the tuna auction on the 3rd day, she transported 2 planes of seafood to Japan to test the market. As a result, as soon as the fish was placed on the table, they were directly divided by those sushi restaurants. Jiang Hai's fish, no matter what kind of fish, according to the industry's internal words, the meat quality was all S or even S+, but there was no S+, but Jiang Hai's fish was indeed better than the average S-rated fish. The taste was more delicious, fresh and sweet, and the meat quality was more compact. It could be said that it was quite delicious, especially when making sushi, which made the business of these shops unknowingly increase by 20%. This time, Jiang Hai's seafood officially entered the Japanese market. Of course, many of the original Japanese were also very popular. However, Jiang Hai could only say that they were unlucky. What a joke! Jiang Hai was still quite confident about his fish. The rest of March also ended in this busy period. Jiang Hai's grassland was finally ready. Next, he would study his new idea of planting rice, but before that, his tea should be collected. Chapter 994. Remember, don't pull, don't pull, don't pull, don't pull, don't do that. You have to use your thumbnail to pinch the root. Only then can it be considered plucked. Jiang Hai looked at Delina, Marian, Taraga, and Taraga's 2 classmates, Pell Selzy and Bessie Oliver, and said seriously, "Like this?" Hearing his words, Pell Circe also gave it a try. He pinched a sprout and handed it to Jiang Highway. Jiang Highway took it and looked at it. Although there were some flaws, it was already pretty good. "Yes, like this. Come on girls, let's get to work. Do well, I'll give you $50 an hour. You can eat the best beef and fish here for lunch and dinner." Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said to the 5 girls behind him. Of course, he was mainly talking to Taraga's 2 classmates. "Wow, this is great. I can buy the latest clothes now. I want to change my shoes too." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the 2 girls shouted excitedly. Looking at them, Jiang Hai signaled them to start working. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the 5 girls quickly scattered in front of the tea trees nearby and carefully picked the buds. Jiang Hai didn't like to drink tea before. There weren't many young people who liked to drink tea. Most people liked to drink cola, Sprite, Fanta and the like. They didn't drink carbonated drinks. They also liked to drink soy milk, fruit juice and the like. Jiang Hai was the same. He liked cola, but he only drank delicious ones. He didn't drink Pepsi because he felt that Pepsi didn't taste good. Of course, for most people the taste was actually the same. But ever since he got the tea leaves from Zhang Dihai and found that the tea leaves could increase his spiritual energy, he basically never left the tea leaves. Gradually he found that drinking tea was actually very good. It nourished the body and made people feel very comfortable, especially the tea leaves that he planted with spiritual energy. The taste and the feeling, it was hard to describe, but it would make people feel as if their pores were expelling waste gas, making people feel very energetic. So this year when he picked the tea leaves he paid more attention to it. As for the tea leaves that he bought, to be honest, Jiang Hai didn't like them very much. Jiang Hai also spread the word here. If someone liked tea, they could make a cup now and see if there was a layer of oil on the tea leaves. Some people would say that it was the oil that was added when frying tea leaves. In fact, this was nonsense. There was a kind of oil called tea oil. The tea leaves themselves contained oil, so there was no need to add oil when frying vegetables. The oil was actually a pesticide. Because the amount was small, it wouldn't be a big deal if people drank it, but it certainly wouldn't be good for them. Jiang Hai didn't drink this kind of tea because it was sprayed with pesticides. These pesticide residues were very destructive to spiritual energy. The real good tea leaves were divided into Priming Ming tea and Priming Yu tea. If it wasn't these 2 tea leaves, then it was relatively bad. Priming Ming tea leaves were picked before the Qingming festival, and Priming Yu tea leaves were picked after the Qingming festival and before the Guyu tea leaves. The tea leaves after the Guyu tea leaves were very bad in the eyes of insiders. It was the same no matter how good the taste was, because after the Guyu tea leaves were sprayed with pesticides. Why did they have to be sprayed with pesticides? Because if they weren't sprayed with pesticides they would have worms. And how to distinguish whether the tea was Priming Ming tea or Priming Yu tea leaves? It was to see if there was a layer of oil when it was soaked. If there was, then it was fake. If there wasn't, then it was real. Of course, it couldn't be ruled out that some people had sprayed the tea leaves before the Qingming festival. Jiang Hai didn't know much about such tea leaves. He could only say that they were willing to do so, and Jiang Hai couldn't do anything about it. Among the tea leaves sold in the market, take Longjing tea as an example. This was also Jiang Hai's favorite tea leaves. The best tea leaves were naturally from West Lake. What Lion Peak, Maijiawu and so on were considered the most ordinary ones. But even the most ordinary ones were basically not available. Other than that, Zhejiang's Longjing tea and Hangzhou's Longjing tea were actually not bad. But no matter which of the 3 Longjing tea leaves, even if they were from the Qingming festival, the cheapest Priming Ming tea leaves would cost at least 600 yuan per caddy. If there was a promotion, the price of 500 yuan per caddy could also be real. For example, if you soak the tea leaves that cost more than 100 yuan per caddy, or 200 to 300 yuan per caddy, it would definitely be oily. Moreover, the tea leaves wouldn't have a strong bean fragrance. Looking at the 5 girls working hard in front of him, Jiang Hai watched for a while before leaving. He went to find Knerson Peters, who had already been prepared. When Jiang Hai was looking for him, he was doing push-ups in front of his house. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, Knerson Peters signaled Jiang Hai to wait for a moment with his eyes. Then he sped up his exercise. Knerson Peters had been living quite well recently. Back then he was also a person with a hard life. Because he was big and strong, he was tricked by some of his so-called friends into doing underground boxing. Then he was hit by a car. Fortunately, he wasn't destined to die. Jiang Hai first treated him to a hamburger, then paid for his medical expenses and saved his life. Although this person was a little stubborn, he knew very well what it meant to repay kindness. So after he recovered from his injuries, he came to Boston to find Jiang Hai. In the end, he mistakenly entered a bandit gang. Fortunately, after he found out that his enemy was his benefactor, he directly changed sides. It could be considered a great help to Jiang Hai. Then he stayed in the manor. However, when he stayed in the manor, he always felt that he didn't have much of a presence. He wanted to be Jiang Hai's bodyguard to protect his safety, but the problem was that in the manor his strength was really not very high. Bale was stronger than him, and Azalina and the other women were also stronger than him. Therefore he was somewhat injured. He always thought that his presence was low because he was too weak. Therefore he trained as if his life depended on it. Fortunately, he was in Jiang Hai's manor. He ate Jiang Hai's beef and fish every day, and the aura in his body helped him recover from his crippling training. On the contrary, it made him stronger and stronger. In the absence of any protein powder, his body and strength were no weaker than those strongmen or even stronger. But recently he felt that he was finally useful. Although Jiang Hai didn't ask him to protect himself, he was working with Jiang Hai sowing grass seeds. After sowing grass seeds for a month, it was obvious that he and Jiang Hai were much closer. "Boss, what are we doing today?" After finishing the 3,000 push-ups, Knursen Peters stood up, patted the dirt off his hands, and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. In his opinion, working with Jiang Hai every day was the happiest thing for him. Of course he wasn't gay. He just felt that he was useful. Bale asked him to go out and donate to some special professional women, and he was very happy. Of course, Harriman Fells was also very happy. "Today we're going to level a piece of land and prepare to make a paddy field." Jiang Hai had said that he wanted to build a paddy field so he would do it. Although he hadn't done it before, he could look it up, right? Jiang Hai didn't know much about rice farming, but according to a domestic encyclopedia, it was nothing more than the above steps. First, they had to level a piece of land and make it soft, then plow it. Next, they had to soak the rice seedlings with water. Jiang Hai had the help of spiritual energy, so these were all trivial matters. Then they had to transplant the rice seedlings, which was the most tiring. However, Jiang Hai didn't have to go through so much trouble. He borrowed a rice transplanter. Who was Jiang Hai? Although Jiang Hai only planted 2 mu of land, some people took the initiative to lend their transplanters to him. Therefore, Jiang Hai didn't have to worry about these trivial matters. Then it was time to get rid of the insects and weeds, because Jiang Hai was only going to get 2 mu of land. After that, it was time to fertilize the land. There was spiritual energy, so Jiang Hai didn't need to do it himself. Thinking about it, Jiang Hai's heart still couldn't get over it. Finally, they had to irrigate and drain. This could also be done by machines, so Jiang Hai didn't need to worry about it. After knowing all the steps, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters went to the riverside, which was the man-made river. This way, irrigation and pumping would be easy, and the man-made river wouldn't have any problems with rising water. After all, it was directly connected to the sea. Jiang Hai picked a piece of flat land about 2 mu of land. There weren't many places in Jiang Hai's land, but there were a lot of flat land. Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters began to shovel the turf. Jiang Hai wanted to dig a hole in the 2 mu of land. It didn't need to be too deep, about half a meter would be enough. The roots of the grass weren't that deep, so it saved them the trouble of weeding. Then they could use a fence or something to build a circle around it. There were very few stones in Jiang Hai's land, so it saved them a lot of trouble. In addition, the 2 of them had great strength. After a few shovels, the hole was already half a meter deep. Then they continued to dig. In the morning, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters had already finished about a quarter of the project. At noon, Chia and the others had already prepared lunch. Jiang Hai and Delina, who had been busy all morning, had a delicious meal together. Taraga's 2 classmates, Pel Circe and Bessie Oliver, who ate the beef and fish from Jiang Hai's manor for the first time, their eyes almost popped out. This was the first time they had eaten such delicious food. Most importantly, there was no limit. After resting for 2 hours at noon, everyone divided the work and began to work again. In the afternoon, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters had almost finished 1 mu of land. Just as the sky was turning dark and they were about to go back, they saw Robbins Garcia running towards them with a net. Looking at his serious face, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stop. What happened? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.